We stand for the true and north, the cities and skylines, the strong and free. For those who value the story and source, the opinion and fact, the context and clarity to help illuminate the path and potential, the drive and direction. We are the one and only, the Globe and Mail. What shapes your world?
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to those of you in the room in Vancouver and also to those of you that are joining us digitally. It's great to have you with us. I'm Wendy Cox. I'm a Deputy National News Editor, and I've been the Bureau Chief in British Columbia for 14 years, I think. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're situated on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. I'm very glad that this was convened in Vancouver. About 20 years ago, the Globe and Mail made a specific commitment to add resources into the West and BC in particular. We have the largest bureau outside of Toronto in British Columbia, and I learned this morning that some of the Globe's biggest growth rates are in BC and by extension in Western Canada. We don't normally do this at Globe and Mail events, but we thought it would be appropriate, given the moment that we're in nationally, to play the national anthem. So for those of you that can, please stand. It's fantastic to see such a strong turnout here today. I appreciate everybody being here. We're here to explore how Canada can build a stronger nation by diving into the growth opportunities and the potential, specifically in British Columbia. Our afternoon today has got an elite lineup of industry leaders, senior thought leaders, and elected officials. On behalf of the Globe and Mail, I would like to recognize and thank Vancity Credit Union, the Export Development Bank of Canada, and Bennett Jones for their support in making the day's events possible. It's my pleasure to turn it over to our Editor-in-Chief, David Walmsley.
Thanks, Wendy, and good afternoon to you all. It's a privilege to be here. I wanted to reflect a little bit on why we're bringing people together across the country. As you may have seen on a slide a few moments ago, for those of you who are watching either remotely or in the room, this is our fourth meeting, which we call INTERSECT, and it's about connecting the country in a way that the Globe has done since it was created in 1844. The Globe and Mail is an organization that is older than Canada herself. And the threats to this country are not diluted. They become more severe by the day. Questions such as, what are the organizing principles of this horizontal country? How do we connect regions together? How do we ensure that the national conversation is convened by an organization that provides both long-earned trust and also a commitment to challenging the status quo and consensus. And that's why we've been in Calgary and Toronto, and more recently, 2 weeks ago in Halifax, and today in Vancouver. And the stories are different. In Halifax, we have found tremendous optimism, a region working hard together, believing, particularly with defence budgets flowing, an opportunity for future growth, jobs, and opportunity where there can be dual purpose use of commercial and defence capabilities. In Calgary, we listened, as we heard, skepticism, a sense of suspicion that the decisions that define their lives are made many, many kilometres away back in Ottawa. But they see also an opportunity and a chance with MOUs and pipelines. And of course, they raise the question of British Columbia and what is the role of this province, the access to tidal water, and the challenges with climate change and environmental responsibility. So for us to come here today, it is as much a listening tour for us to ensure that we're able to offer up the editorial coverage that reflects the reality on the ground and also does allow for the hosting of a national conversation that otherwise doesn't necessarily take place. We know that local media, the backbone of local communities, struggle. We believe that the opportunities for the Globe to bed in communities and tell the stories that reflect the reality of what you're facing is our responsibility, and we won't shy from that. You'll hear through today on the agenda of the afternoon a lot of good discussion on energy, a lot of forward thinking around what the opportunities not only of this province and further north, but also to the east of BC and internationally, where are the bets that this country will make, and how do we ensure that the future for our young ones who face tremendous pressures around employment levels and also affordability have a chance to feel that they're contributing to society in the way that all of you feel that you do as well. And so with that, I would like to invite Bill Cunningham to the stage. Bill is the Executive Vice President of Business and Commercial Banking at Vancity Credit Union, and he has a few notes to say himself. Thank you.
Thanks so much to the Globe and Mail for bringing us all together today. As Canada's largest credit union with our head office here in Vancouver and our decision-making fundamentally rooted in British Columbia, we at Vancity have a unique perspective amongst national financial institutions on BC's place in the Canadian economy. At the macroeconomic level, BC has strong fundamentals for growth. For example, we've got a very diversified economy with multiple growth engines to lean into, with less reliance on US trade than the rest of Canada. We have an ecosystem that punches above its weight in startups and investment, with a higher share of Canada's startups and venture capital investments here in BC than our share of Canada's population. We have real global strength in innovation, with companies like Abcelera helping put Vancouver on the global map. We have a small business economy with one of the highest per capita densities in the country. And BC's clean energy and clean tech strengths are a clear advantage in trading with countries that are still committed to reducing emissions and fighting climate change. A key question for us today is, how do we unlock that potential? And I'm really looking forward to this discussion. But our experiences at Vancity, working with our members, with people and small businesses, tell us that's not the whole story. It's just as important to think about how we translate big picture economic success into real outcomes for people and bring this growth to the people and businesses that need it the most. Small and medium businesses and local economies are the backbone of the BC economy. But the moment now is not encouraging bottom-up investment and growth. Rising costs are weighting down many people and businesses in our communities. And even more concerning, confidence in the future is weakening. In recently published public polling, 54% of Canadians said they are less certain about their future today than they were a year ago. 71% said that they are currently delaying major purchases, and 45% say they are delaying major life decisions. For many people in their lives and their businesses, this means less investment, fewer risks, and delayed growth. And from early 2024 until the last available data in 2025, Canada has experienced more business closures than startups for 6 consecutive quarters. That's a concerning trend. And local economies are feeling the strain, with reduced spending and increased reliance on community supports such as food banks. And Canadians don't feel that this is going away. In those same polls, 89% of Canadians said instability and uncertainty are their new normal. So how do we move from this negative cycle to one where local growth drives resilience and opportunity? You know, at Van City, we're celebrating our 80th birthday this year, and bringing financial hope and optimism back to our members is at the center of what we do. We want to be a financial force for British Columbians. And make no mistake, we are optimistic about the economic potential of British Columbia. A big reason we are here today is to see how we in this room can work together to approach this challenge. And as our CEO, Wellington Holbrook, likes to say, we're just getting started. Now, you're about to hear from an economist who refuses to hide behind the charts. Judith is the chief economist. Judith Beausoleil is the chief economist at Van City, and her job is to make sense of the BC economy for the people who actually live in it. The households juggling renewals, the small businesses watching margins, and the communities trying to plan a future on shifting ground. She brings 16 years experience across the federal government, Deloitte, and now the cooperative financial sector. She holds board roles with the Foundation for Black Communities and seats on the Advisory Council for the Black Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub and the Cooperative and Mutual Canada Council of Economic Advisors. She came to Canada from Kenya, and she reads BC's economy with the eye of someone who knows that growth and lived experience are not the same thing. Today, she's going to tell you what the headline numbers are hiding and what that means for this room. So please join me in welcoming Judith Beausoleil.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Everyone can hear me very well. Hello. All right, I'm usually excited about afternoon economic presentation for 2 reasons. One, you're full and content. The second one is that you're just awake to understand the headlines and hence less questions. So for today's presentation, I'm going to take a slightly different approach. So unlike other typical economic outlooks where we are saying, you know, it depends, and then followed by 20 slides to just try to prove the point, what I'm going to do today is really focus on the structure of the economy. What is important for us as people who are business owners, policymakers in this room? What do we really need to focus on in terms of what is changing in the structure of the economy today? And so this means that if you are in this room today, I want to assume that you already know that the economy is already complicated. I don't think you want to spend the next 20 minutes to try to understand what elements of it are complicated. That is already non-reason. You're sitting on credit and economic committees and so forth, so you are up to date about it. I mean, you all go to the grocery store. You've seen how that is changing over time in terms of, you know, the amount of groceries you have versus how much you're paying for it. So we are all going through that lived experience, and that's what I want to focus on today in terms of what is really important. So to say that there is a lot of uncertainty in the current economic environment is an understatement. I mean, you have to just listen to the news and you'll be able to get some of the top things that are driving decisions or kind of that people are struggling with right now. So for example, at top of the moment right now, I know most of you haven't forgotten that there is a 10% additional tariff for essentially from the US, which is focused on labor force practices and essentially underlying the fact that, you know, they are illegal practice or illicit practices, and therefore we need to get an additional tariff charged. We know right now within the economy that Kuzma is a live wire. We don't know what's going to happen. Oil shocks, if you want to talk about it. Yes, today, potentially the Strait of Hormuz is open, maybe partially open, closed, who knows? These are the things that we have to deal with as we're trying to understand what is going to happen in the economy. And obviously, I have to mention the fact that there is a technical recession and its technicalities. So all these elements are really weighing in terms of what the economy looks like. Now, before I go into sort of describing or giving an overview of what's happening in the current economy, it's important for us to go back to 2025 and really understand how did we end up where we are today. A lot of you can attest or agree that 2025 was not an easy year. We were talking about recession, we were talking about affordability issues, we were talking about high interest rates and inflation. All these things were sort of the top questions or top issues that we're dealing with. But the BC economy actually did way better than it was projected. It ended up at 2% headline growth instead of 1%. The question becomes, what was the source of that growth? And if you look at the numbers underneath the GDP headline, you realize that really it's because effective tariffs were low, the government spending was way high, and consumers kept on spending. So you realize, yes, we would say that the economy was resilient, but the shocks to be able to absorb those, the changes or those uncertainties is actually becoming weaker. Now, let's start with 2026 and look at the economic context of what's happening. I'm going to draw us down to three core things. We are talking about trade policy uncertainty. I don't have to mention Kuzma again in terms of why that is important and the implication of that for the Canadian economy. We've talked about the oil supply and tariffs being really the external forces shaping our internal domestic decisions on how we grow the economy. Then we have the housing market. I mean, I'm not going to talk about the federal government and provincial government plan about what is going to be happening for the BC market, but essentially saying that there is still a contraction happening within that sector. Population slowing down. We are, as a province, seeing negative population growth, and that has implications on labor force, on the structure of demographics, on consumption, as well as actually on the demand for housing. So those things are intersected, and those are the things that are mirroring our national economy. So if we go down to what is happening in BC, we really are seeing the same picture, which is a natural picture, but it's actually concentrated or more intense. So again, same elements which are sort of constraining growth, but we are seeing that growth is actually being supported by government spending. Again, consumer consumption is happening, but we are seeing the natural resources sector coming up and helping sort of absorb those additional shocks or the uncertainty within the economy. So that is commodity prices supporting that. So when you see this kind of growth, whereby growth is actually being supported by few channels and everyone else is sort of left on the sideline, it really kind of reflects on the fact that not everyone is experiencing the 2% growth or the potential 1.3, which is projected for 2026. So what is different in 2026? So what we are realizing is that we have uncertainty that is persistent, and that this is also compounding. This is what we're saying. In 2009, we had a financial crisis. It was subprime mortgage-based. 2020, we had the COVID crisis. It was a global shock, but very much health-focused, and we could contain that. Where we are right now, nobody can really point to one thing and how that is sort of going to be resolved, because there are many shocks coming at us at the same time, making policy shifts very difficult to do. The second is that we have mixed economic signals happening. What is happening in the economy is very much disconnected from what is happening on the ground. I'll give you an example of the capital markets. You're all seeing the stock market frenzy, But you're also seeing yields going up on the bond market, reflecting the uncertainty and the risk in terms of fiscal policy risk within the governments. We don't traditionally see both elements happening at the same time. That is a disconnect in terms of the market that we're in right now. And then there's also divergence, which is regional divergence. We're seeing that you cannot use the Canadian average number to be able to tell the story or a proxy story for one province. Why? Because different things are driving the economic baseline for different provinces. This divergence is really widening, particularly because of the uncertainties that are layering on top of each other. So if we cannot look at the headlines and be able to say where the economy is, what the economy is doing, or if we are looking at the headlines and saying, oh, the economy is growing, but you talk to your neighbor and they're just saying, oh my God, did you see how much I was able to purchase yesterday at the grocery store? I was not able to pay for the same amount basket of goods. Or them complaining about how they feel that things are just tough. This is because we are looking at the wrong thing. We are looking at the headline number instead of asking who is driving growth, who is under pressure, and how is uncertainty shaping behavior. So I am going to talk about 5 structural changes that we should be paying attention to in order to understand what's happening in the economy. The first one is about what is actually carrying BC's economy. It's very straightforward. Already talked about government spending, a lot of it, both provincial and federal. Resource sector, obviously, commodity prices really supporting that, and obviously tourism and other sort of external demand services sector. If you're able to look at the chart that I have there, which is showing BC commodity exports up to year to date, which is up to April, you clearly see very well that energy products account for over 30% of our exports. That is massive. That is a very lean way of growing an economy, of showing this is really what is driving our economy. The second element to look at is who is spending and who is pulling back. When you have a general headline number, it's not possible to actually see this. It's not possible for you to be able to understand what are those constraints within the economy, and then how do we react to support those constraints. So we've seen that consumer spending is still a big part of the BC economy right now and of the Canadian economy. It usually accounts for about 60% of GDP. But we are in a place where household debt is very high. Cost pressures from transportation, from gas at the station, shelter costs are all kind of piling up. And then add to that, you have a slowing population growth, which essentially means that we are not having enough people to actually drive the demand. Some of the lagging indicator that is really worth noting here is consumer insolvency. That has jumped up 17% since, I believe, compared to last year, so compared to the last quarter. What is this saying? Households are struggling. They are just trying to make the ends meet at this point in time. Nobody has extra so nobody has that extra big buffer to be able to drive that spending. And when, as a policymaker, you're looking at that, the question becomes, where is growth going to come from if consumers are going to pull back from this? Business investment and productivity. I think we had earlier from Bill saying that we are seeing an economic environment whereby there are more businesses closing than there are new ones forming. This is a productivity story for BC. So when we have business investment that is weak, and when we have entrepreneurship that is being limited, what we are doing is we're actually eroding the economic base of our growth. And what this essentially ends up being is essentially having a policy, or a government with policy, where they have to figure out a way for that productivity element of growth to be incorporated within the growth for us to be able to see a brighter future. Otherwise, we are all going to be standing in this grind of an economy that is still being supported by a very weak base. Population and labor force composition. I feel like I've covered elements of this already. Again, this is to say BC's population contracted, rather based on the latest number. But what is really interesting about this is that we are seeing sustained contraction for the first time in a long time, in I think, a generation. That has massive implication in terms of demographic structure change. 3 things to think about. Your population is slowing down, which means your base of demand is slowing down. You have an aging population, which means you don't have essentially more young workers entering into the market. And you have your labor supply shrinking. What does this look like on the table? It means that we are seeing numbers which is very alive today. You look at the employment numbers, the labor force survey, employment is stable. You look at the numbers again, you look at unemployment is stable. So what's happening? No net new jobs are being created, but then we're not seeing change in unemployment. That is exactly what happens in an economy where the structure of your labor force is changing. And the question becomes, what are we going to do in order to be able to change that? Another piece of evidence coming in is that it's becoming very difficult for young workers or people to find entry-level jobs. And we can say there is an attribution of that to AI. But there is also a big attribution to that, given that our population structure is changing, and that is a bigger contributor when you're thinking about GDP growth and so forth in terms of the structure of our growth. The final one here, I believe, is trade exposure and external demand. Who is exposed and how? And this is really also the story that we are seeing in terms of diverging or divergence of different regions for growth. So again, here we're looking at what sectors are actually growing. If you're looking at what sectors are growing the economy, this is based on the GDP numbers that were provided for 2025, which is a full year. You'll be able to see, I've done 2024 and 2025 comparison. It's very clear that the drivers of the economy, or the sectors that are driving the economy, are changing. So when that change is happening, and we are seeing trade becoming a sector by sector sort of constraint rather than trade being a separate policy, and we're seeing the government actually becoming a player in industry, it means things are changing. And what do I say the government is becoming a player in industry? We are seeing investments by the government being targeted to specific industries. That is a way a government can enable sector development. It's a way that they can actually create a policy that allows for some sectors to thrive and not others. But we are also seeing things like the tariffs and CUSMA potentially changing what that looks like for people. So for example, for the BC sector, we are talking about forestry and softwood lumber products. With the tariffs, it means that we are seeing that sector being constrained, but it's not being constrained because of the usual forces. It's being constrained because there is trade is being used as a policy by the US to constrain it. What are we going to do for BC? We're going to find ways to support that sector, and in a way now we're playing in the industry as a way of levering the sectoral development piece of things. So when governments do direct how capital gets invested and where trade happens, then that shift is going to be magnified as uncertainties get raised by elements like CUSMA and so forth. So what does this mean in terms of households and businesses? And I wouldn't be able to kind of finalize this conversation without bringing it back to the people. At the end of the day, really what is important is when businesses and households are navigating the impact of the macro impact, there is a second level of things to really cater to, which is what are the secondary secondary order of impacts. This means, what are businesses deciding to do when they're faced with uncertainty? And these are the elements that actually become the driving force in terms of what policy makers and business owners need to look at in order to determine how to best support the economy or to support growth. And specifically, this is where, when we're looking at decisions being made, businesses are making decisions about when to hire, where to invest, or if to invest. Consumers are making decisions about what to buy and essentially how much to buy of things. And these elements, these two elements, are very critical in terms of supporting economic growth as a whole. So as I wrap this up, the important piece here, that if you did not hear anything I said over the last 20 minutes, I think the one thing I would emphasize for you to consider or take on is to really think about what is changing in 2026 is that uncertainty is becoming the new baseline. Whether we like it or don't like it, traditional economic models are being thrown out. They're being questioned, they're being challenged. So we have to look at how differently are we going to stand up and be able to show up in the economy when we are seeing all these shifts coming up and they're becoming permanent rather than structural or periodic. So as decision makers, as people who have different influences across different spaces and industries, take a look and be able to really try to understand the structural changes component of things. Like really try to look at, so what? What does this mean for people when they are, like, what is that behavioral change that is being driven? And once you understand that behavioral change which is being driven and the implication of that, I think it's easier for us to be able to drive change in a way that actually is informed by what the economy is doing, rather than looking at headline numbers and thinking everything is okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Judith, for that fascinating and more than a little worrying presentation. So, my name is Patrick Brethauer. I'm the editorials editor at the Globe and Mail. And I'm delighted to be sitting down today with former BC Premier Christy Clark. And we're going to explore how smart policy can strengthen both this province's prosperity and the country's prosperity. Christy holds a unique perspective as she brings firsthand experience to the intersection of public policy, infrastructure, trade, resource development, and business growth here in British Columbia. She's currently a senior advisor at Bennett Jones LLP and the host of the Christy Clark Show podcast. Please join me in welcoming Christy Clark to the stage.
Thank you, Patrick.
Welcome. So, Christy, as you probably guessed, INTERSECT is all of the big ideas for the nation and the province at what the Prime Minister has called a hinge moment. So we're really going to be looking at the intersection between business, government, policy, where they can work together and to move things forward. Definitely want to get your take, but first I wanted to ask you about liquefied natural gas. Okay. And I'm wondering, is there maybe just a small sense of vindication for you as the country scrambles to figure out what you were talking about 15 years ago?
Small would not describe the size of my sense of vindication. I mean, it's one of those things you get, huge project like LNG, we went to, like nobody believed in it. I remember going to the Harper government cabinet and explaining LNG to them, and they looked at me like I was a kid, like a little kid who didn't understand how the economy worked. Now, part of that's being a woman in politics, to be fair. Everybody thinks you're just a little kid. You don't really understand how the economy works because you're a woman, but they really didn't actually understand LNG, and all they cared about, of course, was oil, naturally. It's a real legitimate concern for all of Canada and not just Alberta. But there were a lot of skeptics, and the fact that it survived because we got it too far past the point of no return is a great, is something I'm tremendously, tremendously proud of. Yeah, so I feel like, after all those years of everybody saying I was crazy and making it up, it's nice to be proven right.
It's good to be right, yes.
It is good to, yeah, and it doesn't happen a lot for me all the time, but that's what my son tells me anyway.
So it's been a minute since you've been premier. What's changed since you left office in 2017, you think, for LNG, and more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, what's changed? Okay, so federally, what's changed is we had a decade of a frozen economy, basically, where the natural resource sector was just really not in vogue, and everything that wasn't natural resources is what the government was focusing on. And we really paid for it in terms of economic growth and health and all that stuff in our country. So that has changed. I mean, Carney has been a big change for Canada, which is, I think, a fantastic one. So I think, his get up and go, his focus on understanding that infrastructure and supporting infrastructure is vital to growing our economy, recognizing that we need to diversify our economy, seeing that the world needs what we have, getting out there and making the pitch, it's, that has been, I don't think we've seen a prime minister like that since maybe Jean Chrétien, who had a different approach to it, but I mean, we've never seen something like this. And then in British Columbia, on the other hand, as we've just seen from the statistics up there, it's been pretty bleak.
Sure.
And so what has changed in BC, I think we've, I mean, I have obviously a self-interest in saying this, so I'm a little bit, I'll try to be gracious, but I mean, it's terrible when there's more government growing. The government is growing fastest, almost, I think the fastest in the country, and the economy is shrinking fast. Yeah. 70,000 British Columbians left British Columbia last year for Ontario, and most of them for Alberta. Like, I love Alberta, but honestly, who leaves BC if you don't have to? So, I mean, I think so what's changed? British Columbia has gone from being an active player in the economic conversation in Canada, active player in creating growth, active player in supporting the work that the rest of the country does through building roads and ports and economic activity and pipelines, to being one that's kind of sitting it out and focused on a whole bunch of other things that don't create jobs. And it's been a weird thing, because I went from having a government in the Harper government who was pro-growth. Our government was pro-growth. Then 2015, we had the Justin Trudeau government got elected, so then we had the province was pro-growth and the federal government was kind of anti-growth. I'm simplifying this quite significantly, I understand. And now we've got the opposite of that, where the province is kind of slow anti-growth and the feds are federal. And this is the problem with Canada. I mean, ultimately, federalism has a lot of great assets, but getting everybody on the same page isn't easy.
And I should say, I could completely endorse your point about the pain of leaving British Columbia as the former BC editor at the Globe.
Exactly.
I'm wondering, it looks to me that there's sort of two big challenges right now in getting those big projects done. There's regulatory reform, and then there's the need and the duty, really, to secure the support of Indigenous communities. Which of those are the bigger challenge?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, let me just start by saying, I think the actual biggest challenge right now is Canada has been uninvestable for a long time. So, we had...
So our reputation.
Our reputation. I mean, you can't do anything unless you can attract investment. And if you want to do big infrastructure, you are not getting it just from Canada. Sure. So it has to be, you have to find it externally. So, the Trudeau government was very regulatory minded, I think, for sure. But it was when John Horgan said, we're going to use every tool in the toolbox to stop pipelines, that was like, it rattled all over the world. And all of those other 16 LNG proposals that were in the pipeline in BC, every single one of them dried up. Every single one of them went away. So, between what happened federally and what happened provincially for different reasons, we became uninvestable. Now, Carney's trying to make that argument. I think he's doing a good job of it. But we still have provincial governments that are creating, like in Alberta, talking about separation. That's not helpful, folks. So first, it's investment. And then second, regulatory. I actually think that if you're focused on it, regulatory change is actually not that hard to do. because you're just changing regulations. Now, people complain about it, they don't like it, but you're doing it all within government. You don't have to depend on a bunch of other people to do it, so it's entirely within your control if you're willing to do it. The Indigenous side of it is harder, right? Because we are talking about negotiations between, ancient nations who have always depended on their land for their wealth. Their land was taken away from them, and now we have to find ways to support, to give First Nations back some stake in their own land where we can share the benefits of it. So it's a longer, more personal process, less predictable. UNDRIP has made that much, much, much less predictable, so that's a whole other topic, Patrick, I think you'll get into with some other folks later, but I would argue government can control regulation, and we can do Indigenous consultation and make accommodation. And by the way, before DRIPA, British Columbia had done a lot of deals with First Nations that have enriched those First Nations massively. I felt like the consultations were going quite well, and it turns out that we needed some more tools in the toolbox, and hasn't worked out the way the government had hoped, I think.
This come up in a conversation I was having earlier, but I think the mindset change to look at the push for major projects as an opportunity for economic reconciliation.
Oh, totally. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, if you think about the history of it, when colonizers came, we took Indigenous people's lands and way of making a living away from them when we took away their lands. And so when we do economic reconciliation, and it's about resources, it's oil, gas, mining, forestry. Mining and forestry were things that Indigenous people have been doing for a long time. Aquaculture, agriculture, you can't do that on an Indian reserve, thank you very much. So I think fundamentally, not only it's the right thing to do, but it's actually the reasonable thing to do given the loss that Indigenous people endured. It's exactly the right solution to say, let's figure out how we can work together to help all of us get more resources out of your traditional lands and make you a partner in it. Because you're just not going to make as much money, selling art, beads and like clothes and stuff. Like this is our obligation, and I think we can fulfill it. And you go up to Haisla, boy, you sure see how that works well.
Sure. You were talking earlier that the point you'd made was that our sort of international reputation is a sort of a roadblock. What could government do, both provincial and federal? What concrete things could they do to reverse that reputation?
So I think the feds are doing it, Patrick, I think for sure. So you see what they're doing with investment vehicles that they're creating, the Major Projects Office, which I know lots of people are so far disappointed with, but they're working at it. Trade agreements between countries, they're doing a lot of that stuff and encouraging infrastructure to be built around ports and some of our avenues to market. So that's really good. The problem I think that they are facing is provincial governments aren't necessarily playing along. And it's a particular problem in British Columbia where our gateway to all of most of the markets that really need what we have the most is here. And so if you're from Saskatchewan and trying to ship grain, or you're from Alberta and you're trying to ship oil, you really need BC to play ball. And what can BC do to try and make this better? Well, first of all, make it an investment attractive environment, which is cut your regulations and make them clear, make the timelines for approvals fixed timelines and live up to that. Make sure that your tax agreements are durable and believable, that you're making between them, and our responsibility to build a workforce that's available to be able to take on the jobs that big infrastructure requires, so that and be the face of it. I mean, like Carney is. Sure. I think I did, if you counted them all, 12 or 15 trade missions to Asia. And, I don't know how to build an LNG plant, but I can go and convince people that they should. And that's what politicians are for. So we really need the politicians to believe in what they're doing. And that's how you can go and convince people to invest in your province, in your country. And I think Carney's doing a terrific job of it, but I think some of our provinces need a little kick in the butt.
More members of Team Canada then.
Yeah, well, and has there ever been a moment like this in Canada where we are under threat from the Americans? The promise of CUSMA is not holding up. Free trade was great for a long time. We don't have it anymore. We can't trust the guys to the south to do, what they say they're going to do anymore. Fair enough, countries do that. We've made ourselves vulnerable and dependent on the United States. So let's figure out how to diversify our markets and make Canada strong again.
I would say there was a moment, and it was in 1866, and our response was to make Canada. So we need to think big again.
I think you're right. Like and think about the way the framers of the Constitution thought about Canada. The reason we have provinces is because they recognized very diverse country, diverse economic bases in each province. Let's let the provinces figure out how to make the most of their wealth. Now, we've talked about federalism. It hasn't always worked the way it's supposed to. But Canada is the richest country in the world if you count what we could do.
Sure.
And we're not doing it. We're not, you think about the annual allowable cut in British Columbia. Annual allowable cut, you'll know this, Patrick, because you sadly had to move, so you might have forgotten.
So sad.
It's so sad. I'm crying for you. An annual allowable cut is something that the chief scientists of the government, and they are scientists, set out and say how much you're able to cut every year. In BC, the available cut that people are allowed to actually cut is half of what the scientists say they're allowed to cut because of regulatory and tax issues and DRIPA. And they would name a much longer list than that. So what does that mean? If you're cutting half the timber, it means half the jobs are gone. It means half the sawmills are gone. It means half the communities are gone that depend on those wages. So it's kind of like the thing about it though, Patrick, is it's all fixable. If it's all government that's causing the problem, then government can fix it, right?
So the bad news is government regulations are broken. The good news is we can fix it.
Of course you can fix it. You can always, if the government does it, government can not do it.
One thing I wanted to ask you, it seems a lot of the debate in Canada is sort of us stroking our chin and saying, ought we to gift the world with our resources? Ought we to do that? But it feels awfully complacent to me, and that we're not really understanding that we're in a global race. Do you get that sense of complacency?
Yes. I mean, we've been rich a long time. We're so lucky to live here. I mean, you walk around the seawall every day and you kind of forget about all the troubles of the world. I think but that's the joy of living here. That's why we have, that's why we have business people in government to hopefully collaborate and make sure that we can all afford a coffee. So I think in Canada, we weren't always complacent, but I do think that our failure to diversify our markets, which has always been a problem for Canadians, and I remember my grade 5 socials teacher or somebody way back, that was a long time ago, talking about that. We never did it. And then we got into NAFTA and then CUSMA, and we became we never thought the world would change. And meanwhile, the world has been knocking at our door. The Chinese, the Koreans, the Japanese, now the Indians, are all wanting what we have. They want what we have because they understand from a different perspective how vulnerable they are to things like the Hormuz Strait closing. And we just sort of live in this happy lotus land where we have so much and we don't have to worry about it. And I think we got way, way, way too complacent. We just thought it would be easy. And we were wrong. But the good news is we have an opportunity. I think Canadians are getting behind it and deciding that we do want to build the economy, that we're getting permission from from levels of government, at different levels of government across the country to get it done. And none of us want to be dependent on the United States anymore. So I'll give you the last example on this is LNG. If you ship LNG from Prince Rupert, for example, which has the deepest deepwater port in North America, it will save you $300 million per ship per year in costs doing it from Rupert because of the shape of the globe.
Sure.
And it's way closer, it's a straight shot, and it's a deep port. And Rupert's great. I mean, Kitimat's good too. We've got the Niska are doing their thing. I mean, we have so much opportunity to do this. Our gas is shale gas. It is so cheap to get. Do you know how much gas we have? We don't even know, because there's so much, it hasn't even been fully explored. Alberta's not even touching gas because they're focused on oil. I mean, we have so much opportunity that is yet to be exploited, and we should get around to doing it before nobody needs natural gas anymore. I mean, we're going to hopefully our natural gas will replace coal all over the world. We'll cut emissions by a third, but one day nobody, Marin will talk about this, one day we'll be all wind and fairy dust, so we won't need that stuff anymore.
So there's another market I think that the Canadians aren't fully taken advantage of, and that's the Canadian market. We still, a year and a half after Trump started his trade war, the premiers still haven't taken down interprovincial trade barriers. I'm wondering, how do we get that done? Is it going to fall to Ottawa to somehow cajole the provinces? I mean, to do the right thing?
I think the only way they can do it is like Emergency Powers Act or something. It is. We tried. Yeah. And we got, Gordon Campbell got something going with Ralph Klein, two free trade between the provinces, right? Yeah. And then Saskatchewan came in, and then Manitoba came in, and Ontario kind of came in, and then it just sort of all fell apart. And the reason is that premiers want to protect their industries in their provinces. So they want to protect a brewery in Prince George. They want to protect a asphalt manufacturer in, wherever. Not talking about you, Carrie. You never did this. But I mean, and then there's the unions, right? And the professional associations. The architects don't want more architects just running around. They want to control the supply.
Sure.
That makes it very hard for premiers who are much more retail than federal politicians to get that stuff done. So I understand the nature of the problem, and I know that provinces, in my heart, will never do it. They will never do it, and they'll never give it all up. The federal government is going to have to do something draconian to get us there. Meantime, they're going to have to do these one-on-one negotiations, which are highly time-consuming and very uncertain in the end.
Well, I just want to, what a fascinating conversation. I wish we had, another 20 minutes, but unfortunately.
You have to speak for the guy that's yawning there. I mean, maybe.
Well, then we've timed it exactly right then. We've timed it exactly right.
I'll buy you a drink later.
But please join me in thanking Christy. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Patrick. It was great. Thank you.
And now I'll turn things over to my colleague, Sean Silkoff.
Oh no, there goes my questions. Hold on a sec. Okay, thanks, Patrick. Can you all hear me? Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sean Silkoff, tech and life sciences reporter at the Globe and Mail. I'm not based here, but I visit frequently, and I almost think of this as my second home sometimes. I get to cover some of the country's top entrepreneurs and innovators. These days, I'm writing a lot about AI and how that's contributing to Canada's economic growth and competitiveness. Our next panel is titled CEO Perspectives, What Matters Most Right Now. So over the next half hour, we'll talk about what it takes to build consequential companies from BC and Canada. We'll focus on practical questions, what's working here, what's getting in the way, and what it would take for Canada to build more companies that can win on the world stage. We're very fortunate to have three panelists who are leading by example. I'll invite them on one at a time. They're driving GDP, job creation, and opportunity in Canada. First, we have Alison Ankeville. Come on up, Alison. She's president and CEO at Export Development Canada. It's a Crown corporation that's a lender, insurer, and investor that's mandated to grow trade as Canada's export credit agency. Welcome. Next up is Carl Hansen, CEO of Abcelera Biologics, one of Canada's most promising biotechnology companies. And our third speaker is Sarah Huggins, co-founder and chief operating officer at Hive, which has built a leading marketplace for shares of private companies here in Vancouver and is going to be on our 100 million club list later this year for the first time. Welcome. Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. Alison, I was hoping you could help set the stage for us a little bit. You bring a national and export-focused view of how Canadian companies grow by selling into global markets. From your vantage, what role does this province of BC play in Canada's growth story, and why should the rest of the country be paying close attention to the economy here?
Well, I probably am starting off a little bit more positive than maybe I've heard from the previous panels up to now, because I'm a Torontonian by nature, but having spent time here most recently with my team and visiting companies, I think BC has an incredible concentration and bit of microcosm of what's really strong and capable that Canada has to offer globally. Right? We've talked about the depth of the tech market. It is extraordinary for this ecosystem. I think both in life sciences, where it's been, it's really created something quite unique, but also more broadly in digital technologies and deeper tech. You have at the same time, you've got a strong climate technology aspect. You've got the interior, where you've got an entire national projects agenda of LNG, of critical minerals happening. You've got a defense and security initiative, particularly in marine technology, that's going to be incredibly important, as well as having all of the agri-food, the value add side of that going on as well, which are all reflecting these core strengths and critical minerals, et cetera. I personally, when I look at that, I think there's an incredible balance of opportunities across the province. I think the challenge is it's a combination of things that are about the building the prosperity of the future in some of the digital and the newer areas, and getting those companies to scale at the same time as being able to execute. And now you use that word very carefully, execute on large-scale projects that probably do require a combination of skill sets and capabilities to come together, because when you do major projects, there's a reason they're called major. They're really hard to do, and they won't always execute flawlessly. And I do think that is something that, as Canada writ large, BC struggles with, but it's a reflection of all of us as a country trying to do net new and very important things.
Yeah, you've talked a little bit about the need to move up the value chain. Yeah. Where do you see the biggest opportunity or potential in the Lower Mainland to do that? Maybe give us an example.
Well, yeah, part of it, value chains, we talk a lot about this at EDC because it's important. Canada's success is being in as many value chains across different industries and at the highest level. So, that means having IP-rich companies. That means having those companies at scale. That means having companies that are getting embedded and are essential to some key industrial and service processes that happen where the future of economic prosperity is happening, right? And if you look at what our colleagues, I've spent a lot of time recently in Europe talking to a lot of our G7 colleagues, and everybody is focused on this. Where can we embed our companies into the most important global value chains, whether that's in AI and if that's in the future where quantum goes, if it's in life sciences. And I think we need to spend much more time thinking, how do we position our companies and back them sustainably so that they can continue to grow and have a footprint that globally is broad enough so that they aren't dislodged by somebody else. And I think that's really important. You cannot be a value chain player if you don't have a global footprint. You do have to think about where in these global supply chains you are, where you have a footprint, and also where you're building strategic partnerships with other countries.
Okay, thank you. Carl and Sarah, you're both growing companies in sectors where the competition is global from day one. Sarah, you've built a world-beating company with significant value in a huge market, and shares of some of the world's largest private companies. Can we say some of them that trade on the platform? Really, really big private companies, right?
Yeah, well, SpaceX, up until a couple of weeks back, was one of the biggest ones.
And Carl, AbCellera is on the cusp of delivering some pivotal clinical trial results this year. You've already had some commercial success discovering an antibody to treat COVID-19 virus that Eli Lilly took to market 6 years ago. And you've both chosen Vancouver as your home bases. Tell us what drew you here. You could have located these businesses anywhere in the world. And I think as far as the world sees you, you are businesses of the world, not anchored here necessarily. So what drew you here? What keeps you here? And what are the advantages for companies that are based here? Sarah, why don't you start us off?
So we started this company in Toronto originally, and then made a very deliberate decision to locate it here. So we had about 8 people when we came and set up our HQ in Vancouver. And the main reason was, frankly, we thought it was the most beautiful place on earth to live and to raise a family, and that was a preoccupation of myself and my co-founder in particular. We had grown up here, and we knew how wonderful a place it was to live. And we were just willing to do what we thought, might be a little bit harder, to build the kind of global and highly scaled business that we wanted to build, but that it was worth the additional effort. And I think it has paid off. We do have a deep bench, particularly of junior talent here in British Columbia, very educated. And what we found is there's payoff to being a big fish in a small pond. We would be a much smaller fish in a bigger pond if we were in the Bay Area, for example. But here, our story is something that Vancouverites, young people, can really get behind. And we've even had people relocate from Toronto and other parts of Canada to join us and get behind our mission. So for us, it's been an exceptional choice. We don't look back, only forwards, and ask ourselves, how can we bring more people and build a bigger company here in BC, in Vancouver?
Right. What about you, Carl?
Thanks, Sean. I think a lot of the reasons would be similar to what was just expressed, and probably if you asked a lot of entrepreneurs, like, this is a wonderful place to live. It's gorgeous. It's easy to live here. There's natural beauty. That is what attracts people to British Columbia. I'd flip it around and say, imagine the state of our business if it was not such a great place to live, because it's one of the things that really draws people here and keeps them localized. So we were here. We started the company. We're fiercely patriotic. We wanted to build it in Vancouver, in Canada. And to sort of flip the attractiveness of the region to a business advantage, we've got these wonderful universities. There's 70,000 people at the University of British Columbia. The University of British Columbia trains first-class scientists. They also want to stay. They're looking for exciting, ambitious, meaningful work. And as Sarah just said, if you can set that up, you have your pick of the lot. So, over the last 13 years, I think we've been able to build a workforce that is truly second to none in biotech. And I've often said that if we were in one of the big sectors, we'd have a lot of advantages we don't have here, access to capital and network and experience, but we would never have been able to build the quality of team that we had here. So every ecosystem is going to have advantages and disadvantages. I think we've really leveraged the human capital, and that makes BC a great place for life science.
Okay. Carl, the federal government 10 years ago tried to create a series of economic clusters. That at one point they were called super clusters. They're called something different now. Oddly, life sciences wasn't one of them. And yet this city is home to one of the most promising biotech capitals globally. I wrote about this a couple of years ago. Tell us a little bit, from your perspective, what contributed to that, and maybe what other sectors can learn and emulate from the experience of the BC biotech, Vancouver life sciences scene.
Thanks for bringing that up. I think not everyone recognizes just what a high water point it is right now in British Columbia for life science. So I would say if you look back across not just the history of BC, but the history of the entire country, there has never been a moment where there's so many companies that have been brought, I'd say not to great success, but within striking distance of global relevance. And that has been done despite many of the advantages that you would call it in other provinces. There hasn't been a lot of direct provincial funding. There haven't been the big organizations. It's been much more of a frontier type attitude. And some good examples from way back, like QLT and other companies where there was success, I think people key on that and they realize you can do something big here, and so they started up. And that has created now, I think, a cohort of 5, 6, 7 companies that all have a chance to do something really important. And I'll just add, we talked a lot about resource in the last section. It's super important. British Columbia's got a huge role. If we don't do something about the innovation economy, if we don't find a way to take the brain power and the IP and turn it into global champion companies, we are never going to solve the problems that we have in productivity. If you did a comparison between Canada and the US, you would see, a huge portion of the outperformance has to do with their tech sector, which represents, well over 10 times what we have here in Canada, even adjusted per capita. So in that sector, life science, so, the opportunity in the science, the innovation, the unmet need, the structure of the industry where you don't have to be it's not one company that wins it all. It's quite segmented, and a company with a good idea can get a multi-billion-dollar product and rise up and be a champion. This is a place where BC can win. It's a place where Canada can win. And I definitely hope that, that it's seen as a priority, federally and provincially.
Thanks. Let's talk now, folks, about some of the challenges. We're in a competitive, challenging, and complex period, as you've already heard some of the speakers say, in Canadian economic history. Questions for all of you, starting with Sarah this time. What's getting in the way of building a consequential companies in BC and Canada? Maybe you could talk about some of the biggest challenges and frustrations you face or that maybe you hear from your colleagues.
Yeah, I would say a few things. And I'm overall, like Carl, very positive, remain very positive about building a globally significant company in Canada, but in Vancouver in particular. I think one is, I mentioned that there's a deep bench of junior talent. That is true. I think accessing senior talent, people who have scaled businesses from 50 to 5,000, right, or to 100 billion, those people are much harder to find in Canada. Most of them are in the US. We spend a lot of time trying to convince them to move here. Of course, there are tools that allow us to employ people remotely these days much more easily than we used to in the past, but there is nothing quite like having a experienced professional who has scaled a business to be a massive one, working shoulder to shoulder with your team. It's just so valuable. The other one that shows up a lot for us is what I would describe sort of innocuously as interprovincial barriers to trade. We are a highly regulated business. There are more than there should be provincial and securities regulators in Canada.
13 of them, right? 13. There's one SEC
we lose
and there's
count.
13.
But the reality is it doesn't make sense for reasons that I think we can all sort of see on its surface, right? It increases the cost of compliance for a business like ours so that, looks a lot like the cost of compliance in the US, where the market is much, much, much larger. And I think it's disadvantageous not only to our companies because it's increasing cost and complexity, but also to our people because they don't necessarily have access to the innovative products that these companies are offering, right? Like it doesn't necessarily make sense for me to go hang up a shingle in Saskatchewan, with no offense to my comrades there. And I think that is bad for Canada, that's bad for people who live in that province, and it's bad for business. And so I would really like concerted effort to see more harmonization, not just in laws, but in the ways that we administer them across the country through tribunals and agencies to make it just lower red tape, much easier to operate with like less suspicion, right? That you haven't done things exactly the way that you're supposed to do them.
Great, thanks. What about you, Carl?
Yeah, if there's one thing that I'd key on, particularly for biotech, but I think it's true for all high-tech sectors, is redefining what we see as success and not selling ourselves cheap too early. So one of the things that Canada can boast of is terrific science. We've had many breakthroughs, many foundational discoveries that have made a giant impact in the world, but we are still the only G7 country without a major biopharma company. And it's not because we haven't had successes, it's because every time that a success starts to look like it's going to work, we sell it. And we sell it for $1 billion or $2 billion, and there's a lot of fanfare, and we see that as a great success, and we go and try to do it again. And if you keep selling your dollar bills for pennies, you're going to wake up 20 years later and say, hey, we've got no money left. And we have been doing that again and again. And in biotech and in other sectors of tech, the reality is you either start a company that is ambitious enough and big enough to scale and be a global champion, or it's going to get bought. And when it gets bought by companies that are much bigger, and if you don't have bigger companies, you lose the companies. Right? If we don't, so like if there's one thing that if everyone could just get their mind around, we need to build big companies by whatever means. If we have big companies, we are an acquirer of technology. If we don't, we are a cheap branch plant for large multinationals in other jurisdictions.
And just for perspective, Novo Nordisk, of course, took Canadian innovations to market and created a company that I think is worth twice, last I checked, about twice as much as Royal Bank. So that's the impact of one big biopharma. What about you, Alison? Talk about challenges or...
Well, so I'd like to pick up a little bit on Carlson because I actually think that we see this as well. So first of all, our studies have shown that companies that export or companies that are trade-oriented, the ones that work with us that are trade-oriented, make 23% more revenue. This is a StatsCan study we did. 16% more employment and 5% more productive. First of all, when you benchmark yourself and work against global markets, you're just going to be better because you have to be. The second thing is, to pick up on Carl said, I actually think it's very interesting that we don't, as Canadians, go out and do as much M&A and scale both organically and inorganically. We tend to be sitting here waiting to be acquired, not going out and acquiring. And I think that's something we're spending a lot of time with our clients talking about, because there's one way you scale in tech. There's other ways you scale in other parts of industrial companies, or it might be in resource companies. And a lot of it is about having a footprint somewhere and overcoming barriers by acquiring somebody who already has a market footprint somewhere else. And I think where Canada has to go about winning is exactly this ambition of saying, we're the ones who are going to scale, we're the ones who are going to find companies to acquire, and we're the ones who are going to focus on building something that's large. And that takes confidence and a sense that you're going to have, I think, a long-term capital partners to work with you. And I know we haven't talked about that much yet, but obviously I'm pretty sure you guys have a combination of views on the lack of depth of capital markets in this country. But certainly one of the things I would underline as EDC is we're spending a lot more time thinking about that, how we are a multi-year partner to the most ambitious companies and helping them stage by stage get to that point where they are able to be both organically and inorganically an at-scale global player.
And of course, EDC has really moved into the growth capital space as well to provide some of that type of capital in recent years. Okay, so Alison, you have the perspective of not only leading EDC, but you were also a senior executive at BDC, overseeing venture and growth capital funding programs. Are there challenges in Canada due to a failure of ambition? We've talked a little bit about that, and if so, where is that the issue? Is it the entrepreneurs, the funders, government, somewhere else? Something in the water, maybe?
I don't know. You could probably put them all in the mix somewhere. I mean, everything has a part to play, right? I mean, we've definitely been disadvantaged by the shallowness of our capital markets and our ability to have at-scale venture funds, right? And that's an ongoing problem. But a lot of countries have that. And living beside a very large, market that does have the capital to come and fund the last trajectory of growth and then take that company to the next level, as my colleagues on the panel have said, right, and take them back to the U.S. So that's one of the issues. But I think partly the issue is back to confidence about having enough benchmarks and reference points that something can be done and then repeated. Right? So you build a playbook by having excellent companies and showing, and the community, and I think one of the things that, maybe Carl's being a bit modest about the ecosystem biotech here is that people who've had success here have been deeply generous helping other entrepreneurs, right? Once you create a set of success amongst entrepreneurs, they tend to help each other out and you grow. I think what Canada has to do is have far more at-scale companies who are showing that playbook, following that, and then understanding that there's a bit of a consensus amongst both government, the public, and the private sector about helping to support that playbook, right? So actually, I think the signals you're getting from the federal government are about supporting a playbook on growth and success. And it's amazing once you actually get everybody in line that you actually start to see, I'd say, a material difference. And I feel like we're at that moment where that is starting to come true.
Could I add something to that?
Sure.
I resonate with that a lot. And there is a psychological vicious cycle that happens. So, people think you can't do it. And so the entrepreneurs set up, and they don't set up with an idea that is really scalable and really ambitious because it can't get funded. And the people that fund it think it cannot get that far, so they want to write the small check. And in the end, it's so destructive, because if you want to attract, we sit around these panels and people say, oh, we don't have the capital, we don't have the money, we don't, all these things. You want to track those things? You need big ideas. You need ambitious, exciting, meaningful companies that will attract the great people from Canada and from around the world, that'll attract money from around the world. And the smaller you play, the harder it is. So what we need is to get ourselves out of that loop. And I would agree, the federal government right now, they're looking for people that want to swing big.
So how do we do that? Sarah, I mean, we talked about this recently. We don't really have business heroes in this country. In the U.S., there's Elon Musk, for a period anyway, Bill Gates, lots and lots of Warren Buffett. These people are household names. They're known. We've had major entrepreneurs here, Jim Pattison, the McCain family. You can think all across the country, we've had successful world-beating entrepreneurs, and yet they're kind of nobodies. Like, Canadians don't really, no offense, Canadians do not know who you are. Hopefully the readers of the ROB do, but broadly, as folk heroes, as people to inspire more people to create wealth, jobs, et cetera. What do you think it is? Do we have a culture, mindset, attitude problem in Canada? What would it take to make entrepreneurship and company building more celebrated here and seen as an avenue for people to follow?
Well, I definitely think you do your part, Sean. So thank you for, writing these incredible long-form pieces that do highlight some companies that, I'm in the ecosystem and I haven't even heard of. Sometimes companies in Vancouver that I meet for the first time through the types of articles that you write. But yeah, look, I do think we have a culture problem here in Canada, right? And I think that if we want to be ambitious and we want to talk about increasing productivity in the long run and really transforming ourselves into a place where you can build globally significant companies, then it starts right, from birth, right? The way that we socialize our children to consider like careers, to look at risk, for example. I think that frankly in Canada, many people look with a degree of suspicion upon those who succeed. And yet for all of us who succeed, and I am, only about, a tenth of the way there, 100th of the way there, there are so many more, who fail. And so I think it's really about how do we like say, yeah, it's okay to make a bet. It's cool to make a bet. How do we bring prominence to the stories of those who succeed and those who fail? We were talking the other day about when I was a kid, they would run, Body Break and Heritage Minutes on TV, and those were iconic. Like I can hear the song to this day, some 30 years later. Maybe we do those about the entrepreneurs, right?
We own the podium right here in 2010, and nobody had an issue with that. And look what that led to, right?
Yeah. Well, the Globe ran a story about Elon Musk the other day that sort of, put down the idea that like someone could possibly be that successful, right? Look, there's a debate to be had for sure, but at the end of the day, like if we we've got to say to people, you can take your shot, and it can be a moonshot, right? And for the vast majority of people, it's not going to be to the moon, but you need to believe that it's possible. You must believe that it's possible. It's not about the edges of policy and this and that. It's about being willing to be that person that says, I can do this. It is so hard, and there are people looking to cut you down at every stage, and we need a culture that says, you got this, and we're standing behind you. And cheering you on the entire way.
Alison, you want
And I just wanted to say something because, like like I said, I've spent a lot of time in Europe. It's very interesting what's going on, right, with Canada now. And I can give you an example. So when Cohere bought a German AI company, right, Germany looked at us differently. Germany said, actually, Canada has tech. Canada has a bigger company that has acquired our company. Right? I mean, there are things you need to do to shift the tables about how we are viewed. And we are actually at a very vulnerable moment where we need to shift the perceptions. Like Europe is looking at us differently because of this. And Europe is actually looking at us because we actually have some of the leading spokespeople on quantum who are shaping the regulations globally on quantum that are coming from Canada. There's times we have to step up as a country, and this is one of them, because the perceptions are changing. But to your point before, Carl, like if you don't step up and just actually define that differently, we'll miss it. And we'll go back to that, we don't expect that, and then our own population will say, well, that's not what we do. But in fact, we do. And we are being seen differently. It's a moment for us to seize, for sure.
If I could add a thought, so there's been, like in the earlier session, there was, I'd say some gloom and doom about the economy, and some of this is quite negative, but I've never felt more positive about the province and the country, because the conversation that's happening here right now was not happening 2 years ago. Right? The same problems existed. We still had the same challenges. I've been at so many tables having the same conversations, and people are finally starting to tell the truth about it. And if we tell the truth and face it, and take a long view, these things don't fix themselves overnight, but you take a long view, this country will rise up. Like I feel more confident than I felt in the last decade, at least.
Great. So we're coming a little close to the end of our session. I want to end with a couple of questions, turning to solutions and opportunities to take Canada to the next level. I'll start by asking Carl and Sarah to suggest one or two changes to policymakers who might be listening that would make it easier to grow your businesses or the economy. Be bold, be heretical, something that would move the needle, and don't worry about making people gasp. Carl, do you want to start with one?
Sure. Like I think, policy, the way we act, the way we invest, everything should be built around we need global champions in businesses that we're all going to be proud of years from now as a country. And as a very specific policy thing, we need to figure out what it means to be a Canadian business. Like that has not been clear from a policy perspective. So I would say we want companies that have their top entity domiciled in Canada, they have their chief executive in Canada, they have the majority of their executives in Canada, their IP in Canada, and Canada is the place where they have the most and highest density of assets and people. Like, define that as a Canadian company, and then let's figure out how to bring, policy and investment and government and everything else around it to make those companies that have what it takes win.
Okay, Sarah.
We're smart people in Canada, and I tend to think we do a lot of talking about these problems, and we build a lot of decks and policies. But those are really nibbling at the edges, and I think if you want to create radical change, you need to be radical. So I'm going to suggest that you take that definition of what is a Canadian company, and you say, we are going to cut the capital gains tax on employee and founder equity to nothing. You come here, you build something, you keep it. Maybe that's not forever, and hey, that sounds like it's in my interest. It is. I'm willing to carve myself out of that policy because I believe that the future of Canada is more important than how much, I may be able to gain from my success if I am so lucky. But we need to be radical. We need to think, how do we radically incentivize the next generation of people, be that Canadians, be that people from abroad, to come and start their businesses and build here. But I agree, they've got to be real Canadian businesses, right? Headquartered here, most of their execs here, to get such radical incentivization.
Alison, what do you want to add to that?
Well, I'm not the policy person. I'm the person who executes a lot on government and kind of, I think, policies and strategies. But I think from a Crown Corporation perspective, maybe if I can be radical in my own special way, I would say healthy paranoia we need much more of. That's what I've called, because every time I spend a lot of my career in China, and China moves at a speed that nobody else does. And then I come back and it's sleepy here. But it's also partly because you're never looking over your shoulder. You get complacent here because maybe it is just too nice looking over at the, English Bay walking instead of thinking about who's actually going to eat my lunch. But you have to be healthy paranoia. And the second thing is you've got to have a sense that you've got to agree that this country cannot do hard things with consensus. You are going to break things and you are going to create challenges, and people are not always going to agree with what you do. And that's going to happen with both the large-scale projects we do. It's going to be when you're building a company and not everybody in your management's going to agree on what the CEO says or how you're going to fulfill an objective you have to go into a market that maybe all of you don't agree with. But you know what? You have to make decisions, you have to take risk, and you have to do it. And I think that, with a bit more of an elbows up thing, as the Prime Minister says, will take us a long way.
What a great discussion. I wish we had more time for all of us today, but we'll have to leave it there. One of the things I take from this is Canada obviously has many ingredients, needs talent, ideas, sectors with real promise, but most of all, passion, determination, ambition, and a feeling that you don't need to apologize and just go for it, which makes it fun to write about this sector. If we want more of these companies to become global champions, we need more ambition, focus, etc. So please join me in thanking our great speakers, and I'll turn things over to Wendy.
That was truly motivational. I'm going to start thinking about injecting some healthy paranoia into my life. I got a lot out of that. Thank you so much. Thanks, Sean. We've had a great start. It's time for a bit of a break. We've got about 25 minutes before we move on to focusing on two of British Columbia's biggest sectors. I'm glad that the tech sector, there was a moment to remind us that there is more than mines and critical minerals, but we are going to move on to mines and critical minerals and energy. We're fortunate to have Energy Minister Adrian Dix with us after the break, and Mines Minister Jagrup Brar. Talk amongst yourselves, have a bit of a break, and we'll be back here again with more. Take care. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a chance to chat and have a break. I'm now going to hand over this next panel, who I'm really interested to hear from, to Brent Chang, a colleague of mine who's been in the BC Bureau longer than I have.
Thank you, Wendy, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brent Chang, reporter at the Globe and Mail. My coverage areas include liquefied natural gas. I also cover some trade issues such as the Port of Vancouver, and yes, even the softwood lumber dispute, which seems to never end. I'll be moderating this conversation around BC's energy future. So over the next 25 minutes, we'll be exploring the role of the energy sector as a driving force of the BC economy and lever for growth, and how British Columbia can meet rising demand provincially, nationally, and globally. We're fortunate to have two thought leaders in the province's energy sector with us here today. First, off Maren Smith, who is president of New Economy Canada and also a fellow at Simon Fraser University. Welcome, Maren. And we also have Ellis Ross, Member of Parliament for Skeena-Bulkley Valley, former MLA and former Chief Councillor of the Haisla Nation. Welcome, Ellis. Thanks for being here with us, Maren and Ellis. Let's dive right in. Let's start with the big picture. We're seeing rapidly escalating energy needs around the world, especially in electricity. Canada's electricity demand is expected to surge, and consumption is going to be super high by the 2050s. BC electricity demand is expected to surge as well by 2030 and again by 2050. Maren, what's driving this push for electrification at home and the world?
Yeah, well, two things, economics and energy security. You know, really the answer is there's a simple reality, and that's that renewable electricity is now the most affordable, secure, and efficient form of electricity, form of energy that you can find. And we now have the technologies to plug it in to power your home, your industry, and transportation. And I think, you know, when it comes to energy security, we've really just lived through the Strait of Hormuz being closed and what that's done to the world's economies. Now, Canada, we have such an abundance. We've talked about us having such an abundance of everything. We have such an abundance of energy. So that energy security conversation is not as live here as it is in other countries. But other countries that are dependent for the majority of their energy coming in a boat to them in the form of oil and gas, their economies suffered incredibly. Their citizens, their households, inflation, et cetera, went up. And so that energy security issue is what's the primary driver of people looking to go to electrification. And even here in BC, I mean, because oil and gas is a globally traded market, we are subject to that price volatility and those price spikes. And so what's interesting is electricity is different. You can generate it locally, you can use wind, solar, and a variety of different technologies now to generate electricity. We now have batteries, and that's a hot conversation, is about batteries and storage that you can use to store it and dispatch it when you need it. And we now have the technologies like heat pumps, electric vehicles, et cetera, and we can electrify industry. So what's important for Canada to really note, while we have an abundance of all kinds of electricity, the advances that have been made in the 10 years of these technologies have really made it so that the prices have come down. I won't go through all the numbers. We talked, Brent and I, earlier about people get overwhelmed when you throw out a ton of numbers and percentages. Drop 90%, drop 90% again. The prices have come down remarkably. And countries like the G7, who were investing in this because of climate change reasons, along with energy security, they built out supply chains. They built out the supply so that we can actually get these products now, whereas a decade ago they were rare. China has invested heavily in this, in both manufacturing and deployment. And the result is, that the supply is there, it's been built and scaled, and for the first time, countries who don't have energy security could start to build out their domestic supply. They could build their own energy. And this is the primary driver for electrification. It's why the International Energy Agency is now saying we're in the age of electricity. And, it's driven by economics, competitiveness, affordability, and energy security. And here in BC, you asked locally, if we use electric vehicles as an example, now with the costs having come down, if you factor in the cost of fuel and maintenance, over a year you're saving hundreds to, a few $1,000s, depending on how much you drive, by shifting to an electric vehicle. So that math pencils out now in British Columbia. And I think we will see, this is a big transition. It's not going to happen overnight. Huge infrastructure, huge investments needed. But we are in a position where we are seeing electrification. And really we've seen last year, $2 was invested in clean electricity for every $1 invested in fossil fuels. $2 trillion was invested globally in clean electricity. So money talks, and that's really demonstrating it. That's a way of showing us how big this electrification conversation really is.
Okay, and turning to Ellis, do you need this, Ellis? Oh, we got triple. Let's hear from you two about particular energy types, and I guess in particular, how would you prioritize BC's different energy types? Hydroelectricity, oil and gas, solar, wind, what we call colloquially the energy mix. How should we think in terms of the energy mix and what you see as priorities?
To start with, I'm not a well-educated guy. I started from the ground up in 2003, learning about natural gas as an import to Canada. And back then we did a lot of work in terms of why we wanted to import LNG as opposed to exporting, but it changed later on. And to answer your question, the original question, what's pushing the need? Humans. You're pushing the need. You're pushing the demand. I'm pushing the demand. Not just in developed countries, but first world countries. We just want more. And you can't meet that demand. The infrastructure is not there. The supply is not there. So I don't think it's just a push to electricity globally. I think it's a push to all energy needs, period. Whether you're talking about redundancy, whether you're talking about manufacturing, electric cars. I think here in the first world, I think we turn a blind eye to the impact of energy no matter what it is, especially electricity. It seems to be the golden child of the first world countries. Electricity, green, fight climate change. Electricity has an impact on the environment just as much as oil and gas. And if you think about that, you think about what you're going to leave to your kids. Yes, you're going to cut down emissions, without a doubt. But you need oil and gas to achieve that future. And by the way, you're going to leave a big scar in the landscape. Huge scar. They still haven't gotten a way to fix tailing ponds. They haven't figured out a way to fix the stripping of mountains, entire mountains. They haven't figured out a way to replace all the environment that they're displacing. So it doesn't matter what kind of energy you're talking about, you're going to have an impact and you're going to leave a legacy for your children. It's up to us to figure out what that legacy is. And in terms of priority for BC, you're part of a global scheme here. And BC, in particular, has chosen to step out of that scheme and somehow become an island. Be self-righteous about it. It took years for BC government to understand that LNG was needed across the world. Oil was needed around the world. And finally, we're starting to wake up. Somehow we know there's a global world out there that we got to be part of. We can help our allies. Well, guess what? The United States has been helping us. We've been importing electricity from the United States, from coal and natural gas facilities. So while we're so proud up here about being green, you're not so green. The one question I tell Canadians is saying, if you can get off your high horse, if you can get off for a second, can you realize that energy drives everything, including our quality of life, that third world countries want to emulate? It is not right, it is not moral for us to restrict that right to other countries. And I know there's some big questions being asked right now, but the instability around the world around energy just shows not only how weak we are and how vulnerable we are, but how weak and vulnerable the world is, and how weak that supply chain is. And I think we just got a good taste of it in terms of Hormuz, the Ukraine war with Russia, and now with China becoming a global superpower. Canada, you don't even register. You're not even close. Now you're going to watch Russia and China fight over oil rights, gas rights, mineral rights in the Arctic, as well as transportation lanes. We're not in the game. We're paying for the last 10 years of sitting on the sidelines. So in terms of energy, we got a lot of catching up to do.
So Marin Ellis refers to the talk, much of it political talk, but also business leaders talking about the urgency over energy security and energy sovereignty. How do you view that, how that has driven and changed the narrative around the conversation for decision-making around energy needs?
The energy security piece of it?
Yep.
I think that's pretty much the top conversation for people. And like I was mentioning, that's why electrification and electricity is really the top choice, because it provides that energy security. And so for BC, you know, if we look at BC's energy mix, we're about 64% oil and gas use here, 17% electricity, 17% biomass. And I really agree with the comment that Minister Dix made a few months ago that British Columbia needs to be more like Norway. So why? Because Norway, they're an oil and gas producer, and they export that oil and gas. Their energy mix at home is they use about 50% electricity, 30% oil, and just 4% gas. So they produce oil and gas, they export it, they use that revenue to help their governments pay for their services. But at home, that energy mix is way more stable. It means less price volatility for their citizens because they control the price of electricity. It's not subject to that market spikes like we've been seeing recently and we've been seeing really over the last few years. So my encouragement for BC would be to double down on electricity and have us shift to be more like Norway, as Minister Dix suggested, use more electricity to power our homes, transportation, and our industries. People are looking for it, they're hungry for it, and it's the cheapest form. So if you look at Ontario, they just had a call for power, technology neutral, any technology could bid in. Every bid that got accepted was solar and wind, and that's because they were the cheapest. They also had a call for power for capacity, and everything that won there was batteries. So BC Hydro, we're well set up. We've got dams, and so we've got capacity, but we're going to be needing more. And so this battery conversation, I'll just tell you a quick story about one of our companies, a member of New Economy Canada, Invinity Energy Storage Systems. They actually are down the block here where they've got a warehouse. They make batteries out of vanadium, so not lithium, vanadium flow batteries. They just have sold and are building in Switzerland a 1.5 gigawatt battery. That is the size of Site C. That's the capacity of Site C. They're going to build it in a quarter of the time for a quarter of the price. So this is the exciting thing about electricity and technology is this is becoming, it's modernized. It's using digital technologies and AI where you can really optimize and be much more efficient. You can move power around. So virtual power plants are a thing now so that you don't have to have as many dams. It's not that we, systems don't need dams, they do, but you can now use batteries. You can now tap into people's homes. BC Hydro has a pilot project going with 200 homes in BC where if you've got smart meters, an electric vehicle, or home batteries, they can tap into that and draw from that power when they need it, when you don't, and then fill it back up when they've got excess power and so that you're ready to go. So we're doing it here with 200 homes. Ontario's doing this real time with 100,000 homes in this project. Scotland is doing it with 500,000 homes, and that 500,000 homes connected together that they're using digital technology and AI so that they can optimize and be more efficient, that is the equivalent of 1.5 gigawatts, which is the equivalent of Site C or the John Horgan battery, and they didn't have to build anything. So that's the interesting thing about electrification is there's going to be ways to really make this more efficient, which is going to lead to a more productive economy. That's been one of Canada's challenges for decades. We've all been talking about the lack of productivity. Shifting to electricity, electrifying your economy makes it more productive because it's just a more efficient energy. For every electron that you put in, you use most of that. You don't waste it in heat like you do when you're using fossil fuel energy.
Okay, and for Ellis, just to look at the export market, we've discussed some of the domestic issues. How should we think about liquefied natural gas's role in the energy mix in BC versus, let's say, oil, which you'll have your own views on?
I think oil and gas are similar in terms of getting major projects built. Not much politics around it, but still, the initiative of LNG Canada, for example, it's going to be hard to duplicate that. Chevron left town for a reason. That was a $30 billion project. And none of this conversation matters when you're talking about building up major energy sources unless you can address the elephant in the room, and that's politics. I've been listening to your panels, and I agree. You got to change the regulations to get stuff built faster and quicker, preferably with less cost to the taxpayer. Site C is a deferred cost. It's not being passed on to the ratepayer. It's not being passed on to the taxpayer. Our kids are going to pay for it when the time comes. But that regulation comes from legislation. And where does the legislation come from? It comes from ideology and politics. No matter what you hear in the paper, no matter what you read, it doesn't translate to something being built if the regulations don't match up. And for that, you got to get the legislation down. In fact, in BC, they've already admitted they need, for peak power, natural gas generation electricity. We got First Nations in BC and Alberta that are applying for natural gas-fired electricity sources. This is a need that transcends politics. But you got to read the fine print. With all the major projects we're talking about, getting things built like in times I've never seen before. The only thing I'll say to that is that Canada is a country of process in terms of the Canadian can hold the government accountable if they can see the process. Right now, there's no process. One of the most onerous processes in Canada right now is the Canadian Impact Assessment Agency. And they've got binders and binders of legislation and regulations that you got to follow, and now they've basically paralyzed themselves because they don't know what the right hand is doing from the left hand. I mean, this is all encouraging talk. I get it. I've been doing this now for 20 years, over 20 years. But I can't get past the politics, no matter what you read. LNG Canada was only successful because of the First Nations who got involved along the pipeline route in my community up in Kitimat Village. We pushed that through. We lobbied Ottawa to change their mind about natural gas. We lobbied Victoria to change their mind. And it took years and years of lobbying before Canadians woke up, British Columbians woke up. So when you talk about an energy mix, the bright future electrification, great. Nuclear, great. Let's talk about it. But can you get your politicians to write some good legislation on your behalf and make it transparent for everybody to understand that, yes, we want to make Canada investable. Otherwise, you're going to have the same conversation annually for the next 5, 10 years.
And Marin, you touched on some of the aspects of the energy transition, and others talk about the energy addition because they think that we need everything for a long time. But what do you see as the timelines that this transition shifts more towards renewables and away from fossil fuels?
Well, I think it's happening right now. As I said, right now $2 is getting invested in clean electricity or renewable electricity for every dollar in fossil fuel electricity. And it's really being driven by energy security. That's the prime thing. So LNG, I mean, there's a demand for it right now for sure. You know, there's a hunger from those countries that don't have energy security. And so hopefully we'll be able to sell to those countries and secure some long-term contracts. We haven't really been able to do that. And, you know, but I think the focus for BC and for Canada needs to be keeping our eyes on the prize, keeping our eyes looking at what's happening globally and making sure we're setting ourselves up for success. Yes, there'll be oil and gas that's being used, but we are fast transitioning, faster than anyone expected. So, you know, I was thinking yesterday, who 20 years ago pulled out their iPhone and did their banking, communicated with their customers, booked a health appointment, you know, checked out the weather, checked the stocks? None of us, because the iPhone wasn't even invented. Those apps were not invented. You know, 20 years later, look where we're at. And that kind of digitization and those digital technologies is really what we're seeing happen with electricity. It's exciting. And I'd say Canada, one of the things that's challenging to us is this polarized, you know, debate that we have here and has been talked about. Whereas these are technologies, these are energy sources, and we are now going through a technology transition. So hopefully, Canada is going to be able to be more cooperative and collaborative, take the heat down, look at some of our other opportunities. So mining and metals and minerals, you know, we saw on the chart this morning from Van City, that's something that's growing. Well, BC has huge resources there, nickel, cobalt, copper, of course, which is the basis of electrification. Lots of opportunities. And as was said, how can we move up the supply chain so that we aren't just exporting the raw minerals? Mangrove Lithium is a company out in Delta, which is producing lithium electrochemical refining. First plant in North America doing this. It'll be creating the lithium solutions needed for about 25,000 electric vehicles a year, right here, out there in Delta. These are the kinds of companies that we can start to scale and not let them be bought out, as was being talked about on the panel before us. And there's a whole series of opportunities there. This electrification shift that's happening, it's based on metals, minerals, and electrical equipment. And BC is positioned to succeed in all three of those areas.
Okay, and to wrap up, 60 seconds each, if possible. Alice, what one call to action would you have for government to, I guess, nudge things along?
Get rid of the politics. I mean, I'm not talking for the last 20 years. I mean, it sounds noble what Canadians want to do, which is great, but that's not reality. It's not reality. And you think about all the issues around energy, and I'm not talking about LNG or electricity in particular. I'm just talking about energy, how it does so much for humans, the human condition. It resolves poverty in third world countries. It gives us a great way of life here in Canada, United States and first world countries. The one thing I will say, though, and I don't understand why this doesn't happen more often, don't make the mistake other countries have made. Germany is a mess. And who's paying for it? Not the government. There are people who are paying the highest energy rates in the world, in Europe, if not the world, and their industrial base has shut down. And now they're arguing over whether or not they should have coal or nuclear. So don't try and reinvent the wheel here in Canada. Go around the world and figure out what worked, but don't base it on ideology and politics. Base it in reality, because the world is getting a lot smaller in terms of our issues around energy.
And Mayor, I'm not sure if you can fit something in 40 seconds or less.
Yeah, well, I would say I agree. Don't base your decisions on ideology. Base them on the facts. And looking around the world is a good way to go look at countries that have not only embraced electrification, but are, have it throughout their economy, their buses, their medium-duty trucks, etc. So my message to the politicians would be embrace electrification. Prime Minister Carney said it in his speech a month or so ago. Electrification is the path to affordability, electrification is the path to competitiveness, and electrification is the path to net zero. So let's embrace electrification, and that really means lean into it, not just give a speech, but actually set ourselves targets and set ourselves systems to get there, and put in place the supply chains so that we here in Canada are making the technologies, not things like solar panels or windmills, wind blades or electric vehicles. Those are going to be made other places. But there's lots of high-tech parts of this electrical system that Canadians are smart and well-positioned to make, and we've got companies that are already making these, so let's buy them and use them in Canada. And to business, I would just say, if you've looked at the numbers 3 years ago, 5 years ago, about looking at electrification and new technology, look again, because things have changed so quickly. Crunch the numbers and see what's your best path forward to become increasingly competitive and efficient.
A big thank you to both Ellis and Marin for a thought-provoking conversation.
Thank you, Brent, and thanks to our previous panel. My name is Ryan McDonald. I am the Politics and Economy Editor at the Globe and Mail, very narrow mandate. Thanks to Ellis for mentioning that we need to get rid of politics. That would put me out of a job, but that's something to think about. I'm here to talk about a couple of things. The first panel that I'm going to be leading, we're going to talk about critical minerals and the opportunity, the vast, really vast opportunity that BC has with its capacity for critical minerals to turn that into a competitive advantage, and some of the challenges and opportunities that it represents. So if you don't know what a critical mineral is, you're probably in the wrong room. But you probably look up at the lights here, everything that takes place around electricity needs copper. I think the previous panel mentioned that as well. BC is now becoming a leader in copper production. This is what we're here to talk about. So I have two speakers joining me today. The first is JP Gladue. He is principal at Makwate and an advisor for the Indigenous Advisory Council at the Major Projects Office, which we've heard a lot about today. And I also have Michael Goring. Michael is President and CEO of the Mining Association of British Columbia. So welcome to both JP and Michael. I think a lot of what we've talked about here today has been sort of this battle between a new economy and an old economy. When I think about mining and natural resources and energy in British Columbia, I think the first word that comes to mind for me is momentum. There's a lot happening. A lot of that has to do with a change in federal government. There's also been a change in, I think, focus from the BC government. Michael, maybe I'll start with you. And could you outline what you see as the opportunity here for British Columbia?
So we're not talking politics?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. Good afternoon. Great to be here with you both. What's the opportunity? BC has I think, a once-in-a-generation opportunity with respect to critical minerals. We heard earlier, and we all feel it, costs are going up, inflation, incredibly volatile economy, trade issues. We have a significant deficit here in BC. We're in a moment, and mining can meet this moment. And there are a number of drivers, but where we are today is we have 31 mining projects on the books in British Columbia. It's critical minerals, precious metals, steel making, coal. And the world wants all of these commodities, and critical minerals in particular. Those projects are all in varying parts of their development cycle. Some are in the regulatory process, others are getting there. But in terms of, for this audience, what's the so what? The so what is just the construction of those projects will deliver just over 80 billion in economic output, right? The construction will drive 25 billion in labor income for tens of thousands of workers here in BC. And then if you move beyond construction into the operation over several decades, on average, you're looking at 940 billion in economic output. So it's huge.
It's not just what's happening in the hinterland, it also comes back to the city.
20% of all of that activity actually ends up in Metro Vancouver. I mean, most people don't understand that this is a globally recognized hub for mining. In Metro Vancouver, the 18 municipalities, we have just over 1,000 publicly listed mining and exploration companies on the CSC, the TSX, or the TSXV. It's $500 billion in market cap. There's a lot going on here.
JP, from your perspective, what is the opportunity in terms of what it represents for Indigenous people, communities, for reconciliation? What do you see there?
Well, let's start off with, I'm an Anishinaabe from Ontario, and I left my res yesterday, so I'm an import for the next week while I'm here. And the one thing I'll say is that there is a spectrum of First Nations interests, capacities, abilities to intersect with the mining sector. I actually used to sit on the board of Noront, the precursor to the Ring of Fire. I advise BHP globally. And there's huge opportunities if we get it right. And kind of picking up on some of the conversations from Judith and the kind of the very high level report in the economy to labor force to technology to regulatory. To Ellis's point, and you can hear the frustration. He came off and says, "Hey, buddy, you're pretty frustrated." Could you tell? And so with all of that, and then to Christy's point around the reconciliation piece, I really have enjoyed sort of around the edges here. But when we get to the center of it, when we get really progressive relationships with industry and First Nations, which doesn't happen all the time, Tahltan's probably the Canadian leader, probably global leader when it comes to Indigenous relationships and leadership in mining sector. We get stuff done in this country. I spend a lot of time, I sit on oil and gas board, I sit on forestry boards, and when we actually start to embrace Indigenous partnerships, the regulatory process starts to move in line and step with that relationship. When governments start to get in the way, First Nations and First Nations and industry can find a path forward together, they become that wedge to get through the regulatory burden that is overgrown, that needs some weeding in this country. So I think there's huge opportunities. We just have to think about the Indigenous relationships differently than we've ever thought about. And I'm very lucky to see that in energy, mining, forestry across the country. I think there are some challenges in this province. I'm sure we'll get into some of that.
Right. I mean, you mentioned energy as well. Obviously, there's a lot going on there in terms of equity stakes that Indigenous communities are taking. But do you see more opportunity in mining than
Yeah,
energy?
it's a great question because look at what groundbreaking what happened in Alberta with 23 nations signing on to with Enbridge on an oil and gas pipeline asset already pre-existing. The 170 plus First Nations in Alberta and BC, Saskatchewan actually are owners of oil and gas assets. So we're not opposed to it. And look what happened with Stoneleset Gate here. Leadership of Chief David Jimmy and all the 36 other nations owning assets. I'm not sure. So we talk about loan guarantee programs. Provincially there are loan guarantee programs. CDEV has a $10 billion loan guarantee program. Christian Schwab's a fantastic guy. That's not going to be enough money if we're talking $1 trillion in projects being invested. And by the way, where's the workforce coming in? We've got big firms in this country that can do it, but there's not going to be enough of those firms. We're going to be importing companies and people from around the world to do this work with us. I'm not sure mining assets are the place to actually place equity because of the cyclical nature of mining versus, and Michael, you would know this best, like 1 in 100 mines actually get built, or you would know the stats on that in exploration.
Worse odds, but.
Yeah, so it's atrocious. And that's not where you want to put your money. And then the cyclical nature of the market versus energy, which is steady return. So, in Ontario, we have the Crawford project where a First Nation has actually access equity to be a partner. And, not to say that it's not possible. What I really like about when Indigenous nations can get access to capital to participate in these projects, they become embedded because they're part owner and they're the ones. Last thing you want to do is put an investment down on the ground and then blockade your own investment. You start to have a powerful partner at the table with you driving these projects.
Ryan, let me jump in. There's huge. You have to be living under a rock in BC not to know what DRIPA and UNDRIP and the Cowichan decision are. Mm-hmm. I think what's important is like our members in BC's mining sector, we have been partnering with nations for decades. Participation agreements, impact benefit agreements, business deals, partnerships for the provision of goods and services, really high levels of Indigenous employment. I mean, as an example, the Bruce Jack mine, it's like 35 or 40% Teltans. And more recently, some equity injections. So in our sector, we'll continue to do that no matter what happens politically, right? That's imperative. Suffice to say, nations just want to participate in the economy, right? Where, we all may have different kind of histories and how we got here might differ, but everybody just wants to get up and go to work.
It always astounds me that,
there's no difference.
Yeah, it always astounds me that there's these conversations around, and some of this I think is fueled by media, First Nations oppose, as though there's some polyglot of First Nations that exists. Really, these nations are not, not every nation is opposed to it.
Look, this is, the Teltan Nation DevCorp provides the Red Chris mine some $100 million in goods and services annually, right? That is business that's getting done.
Yeah, there's plenty of great examples. You're absolutely right, Michael. What I start to get worried about is the exploration stage of this and the burden that the government puts on small exploration companies to find those assets so that the big mines can come in, buy the juniors out, and actually start to develop. And then even during that stage, there's conflict with nations until we get to a final investment decision and where First Nations go, we see the opportunity, the negotiations get done, there's actual reality. Can we reverse engineer that? Because we're going to get there anyways, so let's stop fighting about if we're going to get there or not. It's actually the how. And so in an exploration scenario, those small companies don't have the pockets or the capacity to engage with First Nations in their territories. So is there a space that we can create, say in this province as an example, where we just know what the end result is going to be because we see it, and reverse engineer that so there's some certainty when First Nations build relationships and vice versa, the juniors and the explorations build relationships with First Nations, that there is an eye on the ball as far as how communities are going to be participants and like meaningful participants.
Yeah, that's that's bang on, JP. It's a big challenge. I mean, that's what this whole Gatla case was about, that the court found that the Crown was not fulfilling its duty to consult. So staking was happening and nations weren't having an opportunity to be consulted and accommodated on that. And so there, there's a solution. There is now that the duty consult is being delivered by the Crown and by industry, but it's challenging.
So both of you brought up the Taltan and in one way or another mentioned the Red Chris mine expansion, which was on the major projects office list, but was another one of those kind of weird ones where the federal government really didn't have anything to do with it. But
foregone conclusion.
Yeah. So, but it does raise the question for me. What is government getting right and what is government getting wrong? So, like, this is where we get into our straight talk session. So,
well, let's start with the provincial government.
Yeah.
Okay. So last week, you're right, there is momentum. Last week, Surge Copper released a pre-feasibility study on their Berg project. I think it was Monday or Tuesday. It's a $4.6 billion capex for what will be one of the largest copper projects in Canada and BC. A couple days later, Copper Mountain did a sod turning on their new Ingerbelle expansion at the Copper Mountain mine. And then Friday, Red Chris received all their approvals. So there is momentum. That means with Red Chris being permitted and approved, that 7 mine extensions have been permitted and authorized in BC in the last 18 months. And that's actually unparalleled in Canada right now, or North America. So things are changing after many, many years of advocacy on that. So that's great. They still need to do a lot of work to get systemic change and durable change. Federally, we're very supportive of kind of the one project, one process that Prime Minister Carney is driving. Everything looks very, very good. Where we're at now is execution, right? That is the big thing, is the hardest thing, the most difficult thing. There are, when the SK Creek expansion project was permitted, BC, there's a substitution agreement between BC and Ottawa on environmental assessments. The day that they received their permits, later that afternoon, the federal government provided its okay on the EA through the Impact Assessment Office. That's how it should work, right? The federal government kind of stepping back and allowing the best place regulator to do their work. There's an egregious example of overlap that's coming, and if I'm looking through that camera to all the Laurentians back east, streaming, watching the Globe and Mail website, in BC, we have a thing called the Elk Valley Water Management Plan that's been around for 4 or 5 years. It deals with selenium, which is a problem that came up 2 decades ago. We were completely unaware of it until that time. It is reducing selenium, it's cleaning things up. The federal government wants to put in what they call CMERS, the Coal Mine Effluent Reg. So this would be a piece of federal legislation that comes in right over top of an existing piece of provincial legislation. BC is the best place regulator. Stuff like that has to stop.
Go ahead, JP.
I'm going to shift just a little bit from a different perspective with mine. So, Michael's the expert up here on the mines here in BC. But when I think about what the federal government's doing a great job in is around the equity to support communities' economic aspirations. When you think about mining activity, there are a lot of tertiary inputs that are going to go into to support a mine: roads, energy, as 2 of the majors. Plus, communities in the supply chain. That's a fantastic number, 100 million annually for Taltan. So having opportunities for Indigenous nations to actually participate in the economy in and around supporting mine development is fantastic. In Ontario, as an example, around the Ring of Fire, my First Nations just on the south where I live of the Ring of Fire, They put the First Nations in control to the point of the environmental assessment on where the road placement was going to go. The communities are driving that. They're the partners in developing the road. They know best where to go through their territories. I think that's an extraordinary flip that we've seen, this very paternalistic practice of the Indian Act and Indian agents all the way to past governments where we're going to look after those poor First Nations people because they don't know how to look after themselves, is starting to go the way of the dodo bird, which is really great. So I think creating space for that. I think where we're still struggling, and it's that one window approach. On the exploration side, and I'm going to tell a story about it, and again, from my First Nations perspective, and an example that could probably be applied here. For the Minister of Forests shutting down forestry roads that are supposed to be able to access mines. The two ministries not talking to each other, creating uncertainty and conflict in policy and mixed messages, and then everybody getting frustrated, throwing up their hands, communities going, what the hell's happening? That is not the way to go. We need sort of a leadership perspective. And I believe First Nations can do that. As an example, in 2008, the forest sector crashed across the country, and we're having some challenges now. Our First Nations took care and control of the Lake Nipigon Forest, the first of its kind in history. In Canada, we manage 100% of close to 1,000 cubic meters a year. Our First Nations have been producing it better than any forestry company has in the past. We established Indigenous protected conservation areas. We banned spraying. We're still getting better production. We know how to manage our moose population. It's quite remarkable. I'm a forester by training, so you can see I get pretty excited about this stuff. But what's really incredibly exciting now is there's a company called Rocktech Lithium that has a progressive relationship with our communities that wants to establish a lithium mine. We manage the forest. We don't shut down the roads. We actually go, where are the mines? Let's get the clear cuts happening there where the mines are eventually going to go. Let's establish the roads. Let's use the regulatory process on the water crossings to actually expedite and create a movement and certainty for the mining company. So we've got to get at this mindset. First Nations don't know how to manage our territories. We damn well do. We've been living there for thousands of years, and there's many people like myself that are educated and have the passion, have the ability, have the networks to make sure we can bring in allies where our gaps are to make sure that we do things right because we'll lead, and we've proven that.
None of this stuff happens fast. Like mines are big, risky endeavors. How important is it that we move quickly, considering, the world, the global environment right now is, it's fairly chaotic, but I think the mining economy is changing a little bit too. It's not so much based on commodity prices. Obviously it still is, but we're now talking about energy security, we're talking about critical mineral security, we're talking about price floors. How important is it that we move quickly on this opportunity?
It's vital. Demand is growing, and nations around the world, including Canada and the G7, have an additional driver, which is wanting to reduce our vulnerability to relying on a supply chain that leads to China and Russia for some critical minerals. That's a huge issue, and China has shown that they are willing to kind of turn off the spigot in order to apply leverage, particularly with the US. So there's a lot of activity in trying to identify, more dependable supply chains. And here in North America, notwithstanding what's going on with the US and CUSMA, I think ultimately we'll be kind of in a fortress North America position where Canada will, I hope, take over and provide some of the supply to the US that China does. So we're in a moment right now, and we need to capitalize on that. Some of the things that we provide here in British Columbia, the first thing is copper. We're the largest producer of copper in Canada. I think we could, if we're successful in our plan over the next 8 to 10 years, we could double copper production. But we can't, investment is impatient. This is the issue, right? So while there are this need to develop new supply chains, investment isn't going to wait around for Canada. or British Columbia.
And we also need to be looking at our mining assets as launch-off points to actually drive more certainty in our northern parts. I think it was brilliant to have the $35 billion commitment to road and energy infrastructure up to the territories. They have unfriendlies, Russia, China going through that territory all the time now. Whatever we can do to open up territories, and the nations are largely supportive of these types of projects, it only adds to the certainty globally when it comes to our critical minerals. I think it's great. You know, we've got the 4-year-old to the south. I love the way he's described it. Throws his tantrum fits. We can't rely on the southern partner anymore. We know that, and we need to be. And I think, you know, the Carney government, they are laying the foundation. Not everything's perfect or rosy, but certainly I think they're laying the foundation for us to be real global competitors. We've got to take our learnings from the forestry sector, again, just taking a raw material, shipping it off, and then buying it back at 10, 20, 30x for the finished product. We need to develop our own supply chains to make sure that we can process our own minerals in the best environmental standards, and that is a challenge, when things like lithium as an example. So we need to think deeper in the way that we actually build our own critical supply chains so that we can drive our deeper economy and actually more certainty. And, you know, the alignment with other countries around the world, you know, paying attention to that. But I think, again, if we can build more assets off of the mining sector, and I think we're starting to see that, we're only going to strengthen ourselves as a country, and we're going to have stronger Indigenous relationships as a result of it, which is going to drive better outcomes.
Just bringing it back to the ground in BC, but that's really, I think, what government is trying to do with Northwest BC and the Golden Triangle. Is the infrastructure component of that coming along?
It is underway. The government of BC is fortunately, and we're very pleased that they are invested in the North Coast Transmission Line, which is step one in getting or twinning the Northwest Transmission Line up to the Golden Triangle. We need power up there. The federal and provincial governments have also put, I guess in the last few years, $200 million into Highway 37 and some of the tertiary roads. So there's lots of activity up there. The Taltan and Nishka have taken over the Port of Stewart so that they can ship copper concentrate to world markets. So, you know, and there's many other, you know, new examples of investment in infrastructure that's taking place. So Northern BC is very active with respect to mining.
Why don't we take a little inspiration from, hello? We can take a little inspiration from the tech group, I guess, and do you have a parting message, each one of you, and you know, move fast and break things, or I don't know, what's the parting message for mining for this audience today?
Get more comfortable with the idea that nations are just going to be your partners. If you don't get on with that, you're going to struggle. It's just get comfortable with that concept. It's happening and it's not slowing down.
To a member, our industry assumes that and really works closely with nations. They're true partners with BC miners, and our message to government and the public at large would be that there really is there's a generational opportunity that BC's mines can offer British Columbians and make a stronger BC and a stronger Canada.
Thank you both. I think this is a fascinating discussion. Thanks very much. Hey, thanks. Thanks, Michael. That was great. Thanks, Jim. I'm still with you. For those who are just joining us, again, my name is Ryan McDonald. I am Politics and Economy Editor with the Globe and Mail. I'm really looking forward to our next session. So for the next 30 minutes, we're going to explore how provincial policy is shaping the future of energy, critical minerals, and mining. We'll talk about how it can drive economic growth, meet international demand, while also addressing environmental sustainability, Indigenous partnerships, and global competitiveness. There's a few things there that we're gonna get to. So, and who better to sit down and talk about all of this than a couple of ministers from the British Columbia government. So, We have the Honourable Adrian Dix, Minister of Energy and Climate Solutions. Please welcome Adrian. And we have the Honourable Jagrup Brar, BC Minister for Mining and Critical Minerals. Hey.
There he is.
Okay. I don't think I've ever had a tag team like this on stage. This is exciting.
Jagrup's a number 10. I'm a number 4. So just from a soccer point of view. And this is going to be a 0-0 draw today.
Oh, 0-0 draw.
Inspiration from the English team.
Okay. Well, I mean, we've talked about a lot of things today. We've covered a lot of territory in relation to the BC economy, natural resources, energy, critical minerals, mining. For me, there's a couple of familiar threads. The big one is electricity, and I know that BC has issued its first call to power in quite a while, so I guess my first question for you, Minister Dix, is what is the future of electricity in British Columbia?
Well, I think a good place to start is where we're at now, which is, along with Manitoba and Quebec, the lowest electricity rates in the world, and that matters to industrial customers and commercial customers, and of course it matters to residential customers. To put it in context, 80% higher in Edmonton than here in Vancouver. That's the impact over generations of public power, including decisions made when BC Hydro was nationalized by a social credit government in the 1960s, because at that time the private sector didn't want to invest in developing two rivers at once. So the Premier of the day, who was, I think broadly speaking, a conservative, nationalized and took the actions that really laid the basis, the electricity basis, for generations of wealth, particularly in forestry, over the subsequent generations, really into the 21st century. And we're facing a similar time now. I'll just put it in context. And we've had flat electricity growth since about 2007 in BC. Some of that is LED lighting and conservation measures, which have helped mitigate the 1 million person increase in population. The other part is the relative decline of electricity load from the forest industry. We're about to enter a period of dramatic growth again. We think 50% by 2050. You know, people have different views on that, but we actually have to take our views seriously and defend them before the regulator, the BC Utilities Commission. But 50%, may not be 100%, 50% is a lot. So not one call for power, but two, right? 14 projects have received electricity purchase agreement, 13 of them wind projects. That's the energy side, and it's significant. That's close to $10 billion in investment just in those projects. And then, obviously, the need to address transmission, the North Coast transmission line, Michael referred to it a little while ago, but also distribution, because as a society grows, that is the significant cost, and there was a failure, I would argue, under the previous government to invest in the basic infrastructure of BC Hydro. And finally, we need to increase, do what we're doing, therefore. Conserve, the best Power Smart program, I think, in the world, because save 800 megawatts of capacity through that program, the new initiatives in that program, significant. That we've got to optimize, we've got to invest in our existing dams, doing that at Revelstoke 6 and other places, to another 1,000 megawatts, and then we've got to build. And that means not just energy, which intermittent energy is great and the price is coming down, but also capacity. And so we laid out our plan to do that and present to the Utilities Commission that considers large hydro, but also geothermal and biomass and everything else. So it's a significant plan, the largest capital plan we've seen for the largest increase in demand that BC Hydro has ever faced. It's positive, obvious for the economy, and it's essential for things like the development and mining that Michael Gehring and others have talked about here.
Maybe I'll let your fellow minister talk to that specific issue. How important is that piece of infrastructure to unlock the mining opportunity in Northwest BC?
First of all, Ryan, thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah.
And I also want to say thanks to all of you for making huge sacrifice today. coming to see and listen to us as compared to the World Cup match outside, outside there. The mining sector, I just want to say to begin with that BC mining sector is the fast-growing, responsible mining sector in the nation to provide critical minerals for the low-carbon economy, create exceptional jobs for the people of British Columbia, and also advance reconciliation with the First Nations. And we have approved 7 major mining projects, during the last 18 months. So, in other words, every quarter a new major mining project was approved. And these projects together bring roughly about $7 billion capital investment, and that will create thousands of construction jobs and, of course, thousands of jobs during the mine cycle, regular job, particularly in the rural area. The industry, I know Michael Goring was here sitting before me, the industry has been asking for certainty and stability for a long, long time, including under the previous administration. Nothing much happened. We are taking significant actions to provide that certainty and stability. We have introduced in the province of British Columbia fixed permitting timelines for the mineral exploration, the first province to do that. Now the application will go through within 40 to 140 days, depending on the size and complexity and disturbance of the land, but that will be done. We have $3 million additional in this budget, and we are hiring more staff. Actually, we have hired almost all the staff members to do that. Similarly, on major mining application process, we have introduced what we call the single application combined process. So there's a single application, single review, and single consultation at the same time. By doing that, on the major mining application process, we have reduced, in some cases, the time by 60%. Mount Milligan mine, we just gave the permit few months ago, was issued all the permits in 8 months. So saving about 60% time. We also have standalone what we call the Critical Minerals Office to support the new programs and to help them to get ready for the best application process and again bring everybody together and prepare the best application so that they can go through the permitting process without much difficulties. So we are doing everything possible we can do, and we have a record already that no other province can match. When it comes to the electricity or Northwest, we have 3 operating mines in Northwest. We have 11 mining projects in that area. And those projects together can bring in about $30 billion of investment, about 10,000 jobs, and of course close to $2 billion revenue to the province of British Columbia. But we need power. The one thing I've been saying to my colleague, Mr. Dix, from the very first day, I need more power to start more mines. And so we are working together, and that's why the North Coast transmission line is very important in that situation, because that's the way we can start clean mines. We have the cleanest mines in the province, and we need clean energy to do that.
Is the federal government a help or a hindrance in all of this?
You go ahead. What's the question? If you go,
is the federal government a help? Is the federal government helping, or is it a hindrance in getting this done?
Well, particularly if I look at from the Northwest point of view, the federal government has selected two projects. One of them is the Red Chris mine, which we gave the permit actually last Friday. And they also have selected the North Coast transmission line, that's the kind of lifeline of the North Coast area. And so they have been there with that. That discussion is going on. They have also given us, support to build and upgrade the highways. And in order to realize the potential we have in North Coast, we need to do more. Of course, we need support in the NCTL. It's a cost of, if I'm correct me, Mr. Dix, it's a cost of about $10 billion. We need support in that area. We helped both the Nisga'a and Tarleton First Nation to purchase the Port of Stewart. That is one of the closest port we have to Asia, where we can send the copper concentrate and all other things. And that port need upgrade, big time. We need their support on that too. So this is work in progress right now, and sooner will be better.
Yeah, I think these things are, depending on the day of the week, an interesting question.
Okay. Do tell.
I would say that what's been impressive about Mr. Carney's government, is a certain determination to act. And I think this has been very helpful to him. When you announce a $78 billion deficit, ordinarily there would have been, it's twice as high as, other than the COVID deficit, of any of the Trudeau deficit. I think the public response was more positive to that because there seemed to be a determined response to build the country, that we needed to build in response to this. I certainly agree with that. We in British Columbia have, I think, our own relationship with the federal government. I don't think until recently there has been as much focus paid on that. We have the largest share of the major projects on the major project list. But being on the list is great. Seeing action based on that is even better. And if I were to compare those two, the only one that really matters is the second. And so we're working with them on that. BC has a number of specific problems it's always had with the federal government. There's a tendency of the federal government to support inter-provincial measures. And a lot of our major infrastructure measures, of course, go from within British Columbia to the coast. And this has allowed the federal government, and tax credits and other things, to exclude British Columbia from those. And I think that's changing. You saw that a little bit reflected in the National Electricity Plan. So I think they'll be judged, as we're judged, on actions. Going forward, I'm optimistic about that, but it hasn't happened yet to the extent that we'd like to see. We'd like to see more. And from our perspective, if you look at what's been achieved here, take the LNG industry, which no doubt ask in a second. There was no LNG industry when the government I'm part of came to office. Zero projects, zero final investment decisions, a big zero. There was a lot of promotion. Some people were very skillful at the promotion, but zero projects. And again, like the previous answer, you like the promotion, you prefer the projects, right? And now, of course, by 2030, projects under construction or built and exporting, we're going to be 6th in the world. BC is going to be 6th in the world. After the United States and Australia and Qatar, Malaysia, where am I? I'm losing one somewhere. And Russia, of course. And by 2035, with if we get the 3 FIDs we expect this year, we'll be 4th in the world. Well, this is a massive change. Zero industry to 4th in the world for a province. And so it's really important that the federal government play a role here, because we think British Columbia is the best place in Canada to invest. We think British Columbia is the place people are coming. We've shown we can build industries. You see it in mining. You see it in critical minerals on the Minister Barr's side. You see it in LNG, and you see it in clean electricity. So we think that this is the place that the federal government should be focused on in the interests of the entire country, I would say.
I mean, it did take a decade to build LNG Canada. I mean, these things have not happened quickly for Canada. The Americans built close to a dozen at the same time. So how do we make things move faster?
I don't think that's quite the same time frame. Fair enough, it takes a while. It's the largest private sector investment in Canadian history. You know what will be larger? LNG Canada too, right? And I think it's an exceptional thing that we've raised the value of a resource that's owned by the people significantly, and are now exporting it to other jurisdictions at a time when our historic relationship, because as a commodity, natural gas is our largest export to the United States presently, it's an exceptional thing. We went from final investment decision in 2018 to first shipments last year. They take a while to build, but we are rolling. Next year, 2027, wood fiber LNG, first exports. The following year, 2028, cedar LNG, the first exports. This year, we hope for significant final investment decisions. These are private sector investments, of course. There's a significant government role, and we've worked on them. But this shows, I think, what you can do in BC. And if you look at all 6 projects, and we don't need to get into that, and you look at the relationship, for example, with First Nations, all slightly different, which really shows, I think, how effective these companies have been, and how effective the private sector has been in general in engaging with First Nations as well. They're leading as well as government here in BC, and I think that's a positive thing for us.
July 1st is Canada Day, of course. It's also a big day for British Columbia and Alberta. This is the deadline for Alberta to present its pipeline plan. Is BC at the table? Is BC part of the discussion?
Well, there's no proponent. There may be July 1st, but I'm going to make one prediction for you. And you can test me on July 1st or whenever the thing's announced. Part of the proponents will be government, right? Which is different from the original MOU. So it'd be private sector investment. I predict there'll be government investment here. Why? Because there are real projects out there, right? This may be a real project, it's not now, right? There's no route, and it was announced, not in the Globe and Mail, one of those other papers, can't remember what they're called, that they, in the north anyway, they didn't have a route, they were going to have a corridor, which means they don't have a route, basically. So we'll see, right? There is a real project. It's called the TMX Optimization Project. It requires the support of, amongst other things, BC Hydro. It's a real project that's a fraction of the cost in moving oil to Tidewater of any new pipeline. We've been working on that because it's a substantial proposal. We'll see what's produced on Canada Day. Canada Day will be a significant day because Canada Day is always significant. And we in BC have no ambiguity about that question. Right? And it's always significant. But we'll see what they do. But, you know, you have to have a project. You have to have a route. You have to have a proponent. You have to have a plan. And I suspect, because the previous TMX pipeline, it was massively subsidized by the taxpayer, that we're looking at something like that. And that's the choices of the people of Alberta and the government of Canada, of course. But when we said there was no proponent, what we meant is there's obviously no private sector proponent who would take that on, given the relative cost of that against optimization projects like TMX or Enbridge's optimization projects, which are about 1.1 million barrels per day for, depends on how much you think the pipeline is going to be, an eighth or a tenth of the cost.
You say we'll see. That's why I asked the question. You're not at the table. So wouldn't it be better to be part of the discussion than to not be part of the discussion?
Well, I'll take this one as well, but the mining thing, I'll tell you, the mining thing. Again, where there's an actual project, optimization, TMX, we are at the table. We're not only at the table, BC Hydro, because there needs to be electrification of the compressor stations that are the main part of that project. We're very much we're at all the important tables, including the technical ones, which are there. We don't have what we have in the pipeline proposal is aspirational, and at some point it'll become less aspirational. But you know, about 80% of the interviews I've given this year are about this project, I mean, I get interviews about lots of things. The Globe and Mail has, I think, one of the best journalists in the country, Justine Hunter, here. I get asked about a lot of things, right? Much more variety from the Globe and Mail. But that's been a focus of interest because there's a perceived conflict. But there's got to be a proposal. And up to now, there hasn't been a proposal. Where there is a proposal, we're doing the work. But you compare that to LNG Canada 2 approaching final investment decision. You compare that to Solisum's LNG approaching final investment decision. You compare that to Tilbury Fortis LNG for bunkering, which is approaching final investment decisions. Those are real projects that we deal with. And I think it's easier for a mind such as my own, humble and need to understand concrete things, to actually have real discussions. And Alberta, it's up to them. And the biggest challenges to the Alberta pipeline proposal aren't in BC. They're the apparently unanimous support for pathways in Alberta, or not. And those issues around financing the project and delivering a project that someone will actually take a contract for and ship their oil on, which is the essential question. And those are the questions that they need to address, and they're working to address them. And when they do, and when they determine a route, then there will obviously be significant issues for everyone to deal with.
All right, I'll give you a break.
I could talk about it all day.
Okay. Well, I want to ask Mr. Brar a question. Mining obviously affects people. It has long-term repercussions on the environment. It also provides benefits to the people whose territories on which those mines operate. Can you tell me how you're bringing First Nations and Indigenous people along for what is a very substantial ride on some of these projects?
Yes, that's a great question. One of the question which is actually a myth, which is sometimes in the minds of many people as to how maybe, the permitting process and working with the First Nations cannot go hand in hand. But what I can say to you in BC that first of all, as I said earlier, that we have actually approved 7 major mining projects in about 18 months. The only province to do that. And we have done that by working in partnership with First Nations. 2 of those projects are consent-based decision-making. And the first kind of decision-making that happened not only in the province, but in the country with the Tarleton First Nation. So therefore, we are deeply committed to work with First Nation in partnership because we truly believe that that's the best way to move forward the projects as quickly as possible with predictability, with certainty in that situation. So that's how we bring, work with the First Nations. And we also maintain highest environmental standards. And that is also the interest of the First Nations and, of course, the people of British Columbia. I give you one example. When we took over in 2017, the reclamation security was 40% of the total cost. So there was no incentive to any mine to complete once the mine is over to reclaim the land because it was 40%. Now we have brought it up to 97%. So even if the company somehow doesn't do it, we can still reclaim the land. So we are taking very, rigorous environmental assessment, going through that well, maintaining exceptional relationship with First Nations. And that's the only way to move forward to, bring this project forward. And let me say this to you in closing. We have right now, because of the things we have done, making the permitting process globally competitive, establishing exceptional relationship with First Nations, and having highest environmental standards, we have so much interest in the province. We have 33 major mining projects in the process right now. 25 of them are potential new mines. 7 of them are expansions. And altogether, it will be $44 billion investment in the province, about 10,000 jobs, and $2 billion revenue to the province every year. And so this is how we can move forward. And I'm sure, working with the industry, we've been working very closely with the industry, the BC Mining Association, Association of Mineral Exploration, and others. So we can do all that together, working with First Nation, maintaining highest environmental standards, and creating jobs for the people, and maintaining globally competitive, permitting process.
I want to spin back to the beginning of our conference here today. And we had I don't think either one of you were here, but we had a discussion, a presentation from an economist at Van City who mentioned that government spending is one of the biggest drivers of the BC economy. Does that worry you?
Well, first of all, if you look at the period we've been in, and it's been an exceptional period, I think the exceptional may be becoming the normal in many respects. We had, and I was Minister of Health for 7.5 years. We had the COVID-19 pandemic. We had, in a period of really, whether we like it or not, extraordinary net increase in migration, huge demands on public services. I'll give you an example. My last 3 years as Minister of Health, we went from about 5 million people to 5.5 million people, or a little bit more than that. Increase of 550,000 net people on MSP in 3 years. Simply is going to increase demand, and we have to respond to it. But what I know from my time, my experience in politics, is that is why there is urgency to grow the economy now. And you've seen that urgency in the government's response. Changes to legislation, changes to regulation, to advance permitting, to advance clean energy projects, which are essential to the future of the province, to advance mining, to advance LNG, to advance our opportunities across the piece. We've got to grow this economy, and we've got to do it with urgency. I made, along with others, and notably Dr. Bonnie Henry in BC, probably the 30 biggest decisions I made in my life in March of 2020, all my life in politics, now or into the future. And we didn't get them all right, but we got most of them right. We had the best record in Canada in dealing with that. And we found a way to make urgent decisions quickly. And we're in a similar period with respect to the economy in our country and in our province. And so we have to do that. Some of that will involve government spending. Because if you look at any project, any of the ones we've named today, there used to be an old saying, there's two things government didn't do anything, or people didn't do anything. One is politics, the other is money. First was, do you want to do something? The second, can you afford to do something? The third now is, do you have the people to build what you want to do? Right? So we have the most important investment in skills training. It was the singular part of this year's budget, which otherwise was quite controlled in terms of spending, was to spend on that. So what I say to a private sector audience, what I say to public sector audiences, is that we have to have the same kind of mission around growing the economy that we had in the COVID period around public health care, or in the urgency around climate change. And surely and only a Conservative MP could say, with what's going on in the world today, never mind anywhere else, that electricity is the same as fossil fuels as a risk. Only a Conservative MP could say that. I mean, honestly, these are all challenges for government spending. And so we have to raise revenue, and you raise revenue by taking urgent action to ensure the economy can grow. And that's, I think, the response of any responsible jurisdiction. It's why the Prime Minister, I think, has had a positive response, even though the deficits have been relatively high and historically high federally. And he said, we got to build the economy now to address this situation fundamentally in the long run, and we have to start now. We're taking the same approach to the economy here. I think it's an effective approach, and it's the only long-term approach that I think will be both acceptable to Canadians, but also acceptable to us.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so government spending, of course, is a concern to everyone. And, I would like to see a balanced budget. Everyone would like to see a balanced budget. But on what cost? That's the question. We are going through a very challenging time. I don't need to define that. From the next door, whether it's the war and going a lot of stuff. And every government, I think, is in debt right now. But how do you respond to that situation? That's a question. And from my city alone, if I look back in my city of Surrey, right now we are building a new hospital. The fastest growing city in the province, we have only one hospital. And so we have to build that hospital, and that's cost. We are building SkyTrain, right, to provide safe and what you call the dependable access to transit, public transit. We built a Patolo Bridge. We are building schools. In schools alone, Ryan, before COVID, there were 600 to 700 kids coming to the system every year. But after COVID, because of the exceptional immigration that came to this country, although majority of the people did a lot of good work for us, but the number of students went from 600 to 2,500 in the city of Surrey. So rather than making one school in 1 year, now we're supposed to make 4 schools in 1 year, in 16 schools in 4 years. So my question is, do you shut down all that? The question is no. We have to build hospital. We have to build schools. We have to build SkyTrain. We have to build Patolo Bridge. And that's cost in that situation. So we are basically, and we are maintaining healthcare and education. That's very important. But at the same time, Premier Eby is very clear. The focus is to grow the economy. And that's why we are here. Focus is to grow the economy. That's the only way we can address the expenses issue.
Prime Minister is going to be here tomorrow. Is he bringing good news?
Go Canada. Go Canada.
Is he bringing good news? Is there something for BC?
Always, always. And I think I would never, ever, ever want to preempt the Prime Minister of Canada, Well, maybe Mulroney. But we'll see. But I think what we have and what we're working on in Canada, and both between the provinces, I include a very good relationship we have with the province of Alberta in that, for me with Energy Minister Brian Jean and others, is a growing unity of purpose. And it reflects the unity of purpose that Canadians feel. Canadians stopped traveling to the United States in significant numbers after Mr. Trump's interventions. They did. And I think the agreements we've made on interprovincial trade, the work we're doing together, I think leads one to optimism about the everyday. So I think announcement days are important if and when they come. And I participate in them with vigor, but I think every day is going to be important. We're going to be tested every day on this. And Canadians do not believe and will not accept anymore the kind of double or nothing, asinine tactics we're seeing in some parts of the country today when they want us to be working together. So whatever happens tomorrow, we'll be working closely together with the Prime Minister.
It's good to hear.
The people of British Columbia are very excited with FIFA. The excitement is so high. The Prime Minister has to live up to that excitement tomorrow.
Thank you to both of you. It was a great conversation. I really appreciate it. Minister Dix, Minister Brock.
Great to be here. Thank you.
It was great. Is that okay? Yeah, it was excellent. Thank you. I do. Oh, can I talk to you a little bit outside? Yeah.
Thank you so much for that discussion, Minister Jackson Brar. It's always fascinating to hear from people that are in the room and hearing about the challenges that we're facing. It's been a fantastic day. I was just looking over my notes in terms of an overview, but the overview, from the overview of the economy to the discussion of the regulatory environment to the motivation for bringing Indigenous groups together with projects that are going to help grow our economy, the optimism that we heard from the tech panel, the exhortation that we all think big, I think was an inspiration. I'm really glad you were all here today. Thank you so much. There is a QR code, I'm told, on your table. That's a opinion survey on the day. It helps us very much to make these events better if you'd fill it out. And for those of you who are still with us online, please take a few minutes to finish, to complete it, and we can suggest some topics that you might like to see us do in the future. I hope you enjoyed today, and we invite you, there's some more efforts and more beverages to mingle outside afterwards. Thanks again for being here.